This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Assignment. Let's count. Mateo in, Barr on assignment.
Wow.
That's the way we roll.
That's how we go.
It's Amy Morris with us in Washington again, and that's a good and beautiful thing. We'll get to Lisa Mateo here in a moment. Yes, somebody emailed me yesterday. Why aren't you doing the newspapers so much with Lisa? And we're not, because of the political maelstrom and all that, but we pushed that aside today. We said to the president-elect, no, enough. We're doing newspapers with Lisa. Look for that in the 7 o'clock hour. Coming up, Paul, our interview of the week, frankly, on the equity markets, the turmoil we're all living in right now. Ed Yardeni for the entire half hour.
Solid.
We got to get right to it. And I mean, I remember, Lisa, you told me this. You're damn straight it is. Fox killed him. Disney brought him back. They're going to make him do this till he's 90. Deadpool and Wolverine. Paul, did it save their earnings?
I think it's pretty solid. I mean, they come out with some nice numbers, the Walt Disney Company today, Tom. They beat expectations. And then something rare for Disney. They usually don't provide, kind of guidance going forward on a multi-year basis. But they said, hey, our streaming business, it's really going to be profitable. And our earnings per share, we're going to grow double digits over the next few years. So that's kind of got the market feeling pretty good about maybe, just maybe, they figured this thing out at Disney.
And Geetha was telling Anthony Hager that they've got a pool of movies coming up. They're on a roll.
Yeah, they had that writer's strike, Tom, which kind of set everybody back 2 or 3 quarters. So calendar year 25 is going to be a lot of movies.
Are they a blue chip stock? Are they the blue chip stock that Ed Yardeni remembers in his ute?
I think they are, Tom. I mean, they kind of, they weathered the transition.
102 up to 108.
Yep, exactly. So I think they are, and we'll see. But they've got phenomenal assets. They always have. And
you've said that.
Yep, just the best. Just the best.
That's where we are. Our assets are, we're up 7 right now. Let's get right to it so we can get to Ed Yardeni from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. And we got futures. We got green on the screen after the latest read on inflation. It showed consumer prices holding firm. Now today, the focus will shift to the producer price index as well as weekly jobless claims. PPI numbers expected to show prices for October rose year over year. We shall see. Right now we have NASDAQ futures little changed, up about 15 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 104 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 6 points. The 2-year yield 4.27%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that is little change. To currencies, we have the dollar stronger. The yen fell further against the dollar to the weakest level since July.
Big deal.
Yeah, now at 155.87 against the dollar. And then the euro drops below 105 for the first time since October 2023. Right now it's at 105.29. Bitcoin extending its rally. It briefly topped 93,000 before starting to trim back the gains. It's now at 91,000, up still about 3%. Crypto-related stocks, we have Coinbase Global up 4%, MicroStrategy up 3%. Like Paul said,
What does she think?
Disney.
She's in the 10 o'clock hour?
I know,
I
exactly.
love this.
Is this like the Matt Miller report?
The Matt Miller report.
Of course.
Quote the Doge, please.
I draw the line there. Disney shares up 5%. Paul was just talking about it. Profit beat expectations. You said it. Deadpool Wolverine. Also, don't forget Inside Out 2. That was a big movie for them. Streaming numbers were great. Shares of Cisco Systems down 4%. Better than expected quarterly results and an upbeat outlook. But here's the thing. Conservative annual forecast didn't sit well with those investors. That's why those shares are lower. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, I'll tell you the story. Ed Yardeni will laugh at this as well. Now, I don't know if I've ever said this on air, but maybe this is the first time. So they call me up and they go, Tom, can you go up to the 7th floor right away? And I was busy. I said, I can't. No, you have to come up to the 7th floor. So I go up to folks where we've got this wonderful conference room, and there's like 300 people in it, 150, whatever. And I go in, and they plant me in a chair next to this guy who's, he's like Sweeney. He's pretty good looking and all that. And he wanted to meet me because he's a big fan. And I'm like, great. And all I know is his name was Hugh. And
Mr. Jackman?
I had no idea who I was talking to. We say good morning to Hugh Jackman, who I think, Paul, is it safe to say Mr. Jackman is single-handedly holding up the Walt Disney Company?
Exactly right. Exactly right. So big movies coming for the Walt Disney Company.
As good-looking as Mr. Hugh Jackman is Mr. Ed Yardeni, and he joins us this morning. Ed, I got to go to you on Bitcoin at 93,000. How do you invest or speculate in something where there's no underlying, there's no profit, there's no free cash flow, there's no history of gold? How do you do that, Ed Yardeni?
I guess you just have to be a believer. It's kind of a faith asset. The view that there'll be more and more buyers of this particular asset just keeps driving it up. And I guess in terms of trading it, all you can really do is be a technical analyst. There's a little consolidation pattern there, then Trump wins and it goes straight up. So, I think a lot of it's news dependent, and if the news is favorable, it goes up. That's kind of the story.
Ed Yardeni, America's turned upside down. Republicans, Democrats, independents. So we're going from press release to press release, some thrilled, some not, etc. Ed Yardeni, how do you invest in this if you have a minimum time hold of 3 years? How do we emotionally get through the political maelstrom?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's pretty well known that the best way to invest is to ignore politics, or at least not let your personal political views influence your stock portfolio. Market tends to go up, whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the White House. I guess sometimes we have to be a little bit more specific about the extent to which they're also the same party that's in the White House is also in Congress. But all in all, the market it's PE times E, and as long as the earnings outlook is for more growth, and the longer is that outlook for growth, the higher the PE, and that's kind of the environment we're in right now.
So, Ed, how did your outlook on this market change, if at all, with the election last Tuesday?
More bullish, not for political reasons, but simply because I think animal spirits have been unleashed. Trump is definitely viewed as being a more pro-business president than Harris would have been. He wants to cut taxes again on corporations, as well as cut some taxes on lower income workers. He wants to deregulate. And then I think the market is also excited about the possibility that some of these intractable geopolitical crises might have a chance of getting resolved as kind of Trump does his deal-making magic, perhaps between Ukraine and Russia. And I don't think it's going to be deal-making in the Middle East. I think it's going to be sort of a free ticket for the Israelis to take out Iran.
Ed, are there any sectors that kind of jump out at you that might be particular beneficiaries of this new Republican-led government?
Well, I'm not too creative here. I'm still recommending the same sectors that we've been recommending for a while here. 3 out of 4 have worked, 1 hasn't, and the recommendation is to overweight technology, including communication services, kind of counting that as one sector. That's worked extremely well, and I think should continue to do well. So we'd overweight that. Yeah. Industrials has done very well. Financials, and the only clunker has been energy.
Ed Yardeni, give me a Mag 7 update. Dan Ives is in the house. He's been the acolyte of Apple forever, Planeteer forever. Take a sector view on Mag 7. Can you add shares here? Do you hold? Do you lighten up?
Well, I think lightening up hasn't been a wise thing to do. Though
Thank you for pointing that out.
Though everybody's scratching their head about why Warren Buffett's getting out of Apple.
Why is he getting out of Apple, Dr. Yardeni?
That's one of the great mysteries of life these days, is why he's scrambling to raise so much cash. And one of the interpretations is he knows something, or he thinks he knows something about things turning sour pretty quickly here, and he likes to buy things cheap. And it may simply be that, is that he just views that not only doesn't have anything to buy with the cash he had, but some of these assets that he have appreciated to such an extent that he just wants to roll it into cash. And the cash, by the way, is looking pretty good. It's still yielding 3.5 to 4.5%. So I think it's an inscrutable situation, and I can't, for the life of me, figure it out. I guess after the fact, if everything blows apart, we'll say that Warren Buffett was the only one who saw it coming.
Ed Yardeni, we're going to come back with Dr. Yardeni and continue this discussion. I really want to talk to him about Eric Wallerstein's work, what we're doing at Yardeni Research on the animal spirits that you hear me talk too much about. Futures up 6, Dow futures up 88. Right now, from Washington, our news, Amy Morris.
Thank you, Tom. An unprecedented shakeup at the Pentagon is reportedly in the works. Members of President-elect Trump's transition team are said to be making a list of military officers to be fired, with sources saying that shakeup could also include the Joint Chiefs of Staff. One of the sources says the incoming administration will likely focus on military officers connected to Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Donald Trump. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tells Bloomberg that President-elect Trump's choices for his cabinet are good, except, he says they send a message to the world.
For those world leaders, they have a relationship with President Trump. And I think they're probably thankful that President Trump won. It brings greater stability around the world, but it also sends a very clear message that America won't be pushed around. And also when it comes to economic issues like trade and others, this president wants to negotiate.
Now, McCarthy also added Trump's choice for Attorney General, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, won't be confirmed. Gaetz' nomination may be overshadowing some of Trump's other cabinet picks. Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii turned Republican, is Trump's pick to be Director of National Intelligence. She's an Iraqi war veteran and has been skeptical of support for Ukraine. Trump has also confirmed that he will name Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Rubio is a longtime China critic and has called for bringing the Ukraine war to a quick end. Republicans have won enough seats to control the House, completing the party's sweep into power, securing their hold on the U.S. government alongside the president-elect. With hard-fought yet thin majorities, Republican leaders are envisioning a mandate to upend the federal government and swiftly implement Trump's vision for the country. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Amy, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, Disney 102 out to 109. I'm going to call it up 5%, just as a round statistic. And part of this, Keith has said, was they finally give the guidance that a blue chip stock does. They got the courage to get out 12 months or more.
Yeah, I mean, this stock, like a lot of the other big media stocks, Tom, has kind of been a little bit of a purgatory here for the last 3 or 4 years as they negotiate this transition to the streaming business and trying to get to some profitability here. So they have decidedly gotten to profitability on their streaming business, and now they're talking about big inflection point in operating income for the streaming business, and that's clearly what the market wanted to see.
Think of the subset here. Q4 experiences revenue.
Yeah, there you go.
What in God's name is experience? Is that what a goofy breakfast costs
I think it might be.
in Orlando?
I think it might be. And so if you go to, we'll get you down to Disney World soon, Tom.
We're doing a remote in Disney World?
Oh, I've been doing it.
Sparta would love that.
Sure, absolutely.
It'd be great.
We'll go
Can
out
you
there.
imagine what the breakfast would cost?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, we're out there big. So we had a good time down there. Alex Steele and I were
you
down
went,
there.
Yeah, you went down
Yeah,
and
we went
did the
down there.
whole
We were down
thing.
there at Disney. We saw Mickey. It's all good.
Okay.
And they got a lot of movies coming out. And
Well, we're going to get a 110 print on Disney pretty soon, 102 out to 110. Entertainment bouncing off the political events of the moment. Look to Balance of Power at 12 noon today on your politics. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. All right, we've got futures advancing this morning. This is after new data showed inflation stayed firm, but analysts say not enough to derail an interest rate cut from the Fed next month. Now traders, well, they're awaiting PPI data. That's at 8:30 Wall Street time. Also a speech from Jerome Powell later this afternoon. We have NASDAQ futures little change, up about 13 points. Dow futures up about 89 points. S&P futures up about 6. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.3%, $72 a barrel. WTI crude $68 a barrel, and we have spot gold lower, $2,554 an ounce. Some luxury news: Capri, the company behind Michael Kors and Tapestry, the owner of Coach and Kate Spade, well, they've ended their $8.5 billion plan. It is gone, yes. Both companies said it was a mutual agreement. Capri down 4%. Tapestry is up about 6%. And LVMH reshuffled its leadership. Yes, returning Alexandre Arnault, one of Bernard Arnault's sons, to the Paris headquarters. No.
You didn't have to go to LinkedIn.
Probably
to get that
not, no. And that's fueling those succession speculation. We'll see. The share ADR is down about 0.5%. And finally, Burberry CEO Joshua Schulman announced plans to overhaul the brand after it reported a 20% drop in comparable retail sales. Their shares up 19% in London. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa, thanks so much. Ed Yardeni with us here as we look at the market. Let's do a little bit of history here to get to the animal spirits of the time. There was a wonder child out of the Midwest pre-World War II, and he took some exams, Paul, out of the blue to get into Harvard without applying to Harvard. Harvard took him full scholarship, the whole thing, sterling career. And he ended up at a small school in New Haven. And James Tobin, even if you disagreed with him, was always this light of intellect and size. And he is the one in 1977 with James Meade who said nominal GDP matters. This was revolutionary at the time, to this day, hugely controversial. Ed Yardeni carries his spirit forward by looking at animal spirit, which in the definition of Bloomberg Surveillance is real GDP plus inflation. Ed Yardeni, what would James Tobin say about the new animal spirit of a Trump administration?
Well, I think he would approve of the concept, though not necessarily the context in which it occurs. I mean, animal spirits was a phrase that was concocted by his hero, which is John Maynard Keynes. And John Maynard Keynes described it as spontaneous optimism. And I think Tobin was very much of a liberal and a Democrat, so I think he would prefer to describe animal spirits as occurring under a Democratic rather than a Republican administration. But he was objective, and it is what it is. I mean, we have seen so far spontaneous optimism, animal spirits, with the election of President Trump. Some of that may be that the election turned out to be not even close. It wasn't contested, so it was over with and done. But on the other hand, Trump's policies are good for nominal GDP for the most part, though there clearly are some potential negatives.
When you work with Eric Wallerstein on this and you get to the roaring 20s of Ed Yardeni, is it as simple as we underestimate revenue growth at American corporations?
Well, I'm not sure that the revenues is the issue. Revenues, I think, are going to be okay, but revenues are generated on a global basis. And while the U.S. economy looks pretty good, actually stands out compared to the rest of the world, China, Europe, some of these other areas look pretty weak. It's really all about earnings. The profit margin is going to automatically go up when Trump, I think one of the first things he'll do is get through Congress a cut of the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%. And then deregulation is a known unknown. We don't know how much of it will occur and how much will be reflected in profit margins. But oh, by the way, before the election, we were still talking about the roaring 2020s, figuring that productivity is going to make a comeback no matter who's in the White House.
Ed, is inflation a concern here? I think some folks are concerned that tariffs, number one, number two, cuts in tax rates could fuel inflation. Is that a concern of yours?
Well, I think on balance, when you include the potential for deregulation and tax cuts, that may be sort of a wash. But yeah, I have to be concerned about it. We all have to be concerned about it. The bond market's certainly concerned about it. My friends, the bond vigilantes, have taken the bond yield up by about 70, 75 basis points since the Fed cut the Fed funds rate by 75 basis points. So somebody's wrong here. And the bond market's basically saying no mas. We don't need any rate cuts because the economy is doing well, and the so-called neutral rate is higher than Fed officials believe, as evidenced by the strength of the economy.
So, Ed, what do you think the Fed will do, and what do you think the Fed maybe should do?
The Fed should do nothing, which is what they should have done last week, but they just won't listen to me. I don't know why.
Damn, what is that about?
They've got their own agenda, and look, ever since Jackson Hole's the speech that Powell gave was extraordinarily dovish. It was almost wokish, reminiscent of the kind of focus just on unemployment that we had before the inflation surge of 2022 and 2023. Right. So I think we are seeing some stickiness in the inflation rate, the so-called super core inflation rate that not too long ago Powell said was a key number, suddenly is ignoring that.
Ed Yardeni, we got to get it on the record. You've just been, without question, the equity strategist of the last 24 months. I got futures at 6,022. Remind us, Ed Yardeni, where we are with your 7% growth rate in 1, 3, dare I say, in 10 years.
Well, when Trump was elected, we thought about it. We thought about the animal spirits and what could happen to earnings as a result of the profit margin, and we turned more bullish. The reality is we haven't been bullish enough, and we've been among the most bullish. But so now we're looking for 6,100 by the end of the year on the S&P 500. That's almost a layup. And then I think we're looking for 7,000 by the end of next year, and 8,000 by the end of 2026, and 8 to 10,000 by the end of the decade, probably closer to 10 than to 8.
Right. I want you to fold this, folks, of Dr. Yardeni with Dr. Manel yesterday, to have Alicia Manel on yesterday on the failure of our retirement plan. And yeah, we got to put more money aside, but mostly what we have to do is listen to Ed Yardeni. If you're scared stiff, you're in cash, you're in bonds, maybe you can get the confidence of Yardeni by looking at 3 years and 5 years carefully to the kind of vector, the kind of glide path he sees. Ed Yardeni, thank you so much. To have Dr. Manel and Dr. Yardeni on back-to-back 2 days in a row, that's something, Paul.
Yeah, S&P 500 will soar 66% to 10,000 by the end of the decade. Ed Yardeni
but that's only
says.
like a 7% glide path.
I know.
I mean, it's not an Apple glide path. It's not a, NVIDIA glide path.
I mean, the Dow at 44,000. What do you make of that? I mean, I'll leave that to John Farrow with the Dow. The NASDAQ, 21,000. These are just numbers that are just...
Well, I haven't interpolated Dow, but you're looking at Dow 50,000, I assume.
Yeah.
Even higher.
Yeah.
I don't know. All I can tell you, folks, is we try to give you these voices. I want to get Brian Belsky in. It's a completely different bull market voice than Ed Yardeni, but we got to get Belsky in and a couple others. And I want to get into people that are cautious.
Yeah.
BNP Paribas, Greg Baudo.
Right.
Is very, very cautious. That's an important opinion right now.
Absolutely.
We got to get Cass in. Aside, can we get Doug Cass in? I mean, he's the Yankees. He hasn't talked to me since the Yankees embarrassed him in the 5th inning.
No, we'll get him on. We'll get him on. He's a player.
I don't know where. I hope he's okay.
He's either in Miami or the Hamptons. I can't keep track.
I can't keep track of him.
Keep track.
I mean, he's too large.
We'll find him.
We'll get Doug Cass in here to talk about caution in the market. In the 8 o'clock hour, David Blanchflower of Dartmouth College. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, little change on this PPI Thursday. Right now, NASDAQ futures up about 7 points. Dow futures up 90. S&P futures up about 5. We have the 2-year yield at 4.28%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that's little changed. We have shares of ASML Holding higher. ADR's up 3%. It's a Dutch maker of advanced chip-making machines. It basically reaffirmed its bullish 2030 outlook. AI demand was huge there. Foxconn also benefiting from that AI wave. Profit beat on continued demand for servers. And shares of Spirit Airlines down nearly 1%. That's after falling about 59% yesterday. The budget airline says it's not going to announce quarterly financial results on a time when it continues to talk with bondholders to restructure its debt. And finally, we'll check back in with shares of Disney. They're up about 7% right now, and that's fourth quarter sales, profit beat estimates, and it forecasts earnings growth for the next 3 years. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. We digress. Tomorrow, and good morning, 92.9 FM in Boston, we will be in Boston.
That's right.
Michael McKee is speaking with Susan Collins, which is actually timely, important discussion. She's really distinctive, really nuanced. And we are celebrating by being at the Boston Fed tomorrow.
That's right.
If you go to London, you will see 14 modern buildings where you go, Christ, that's ugly. Mm-hmm. And the Boston Fed building, 1977, Stubbins was the architect, is spectacular. It's right by South Station.
Yep.
It's gorgeosity. I think we're on the 4th floor, which is this gorgeous roof garden.
Nice.
Pivoted above. It just works. You walk in the building, and it's like, OMG, a modern building that's actually got grace in that. Yep. We're thrilled to be in Boston tomorrow at the Boston.
And Rich will be manning the shop
Fed.
back here in New York.
Oh, Rich
thankfully.
will be here at Control Center here with Ken Fellio, our global technical director. Nice. Okay. Exactly. Road trip to Boston tomorrow. Joining us in Boston, we're on Amanda Lynham on short notice. Well, BlackRock will send her up there. She joins us right now. We just did equities with Ed Yardeni. New nominal GDP. You were talking to Paul before we came on about the new growthiness that's out there. What does new growthiness mean for the bond world?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Really what we've seen in the corporate credit landscape, especially in the U.S., is a continuation of the risk-on, down in quality rally. IG and high-yield spreads have reached new post-financial crisis era tights, which is pretty astounding. A couple of weeks ago, we had characterized the tightening in high-yield as warranted resilience. Actually, the tightening in IG is probably even more notable. We've outlined that in a piece we're writing today. And I think really what it boils down to is that you have a combination of tailwinds. You have some improvement in fundamentals. You have some technical tailwinds from yield-based buyers, which have been meaningful in corporate credit. And then you have some optimism that at least the U.S. can be at a pace of trend growth or ideally above trend. That's really what's key to keeping us in these tight spread ranges. We do believe that we can stay in these ranges, although we've been emphasizing granular credit selection and sector selection. We think floating rate exposures are an important element of diversification in portfolios. We like financials for a few different reasons, which I'm happy to discuss. But there are definitely some opportunities despite the tight spread levels.
All right, so when I see the big banks report their earnings on a Monday, on Tuesday morning, they're out selling tons and tons of debt. Do the folks at BlackRock, do you guys buy that stuff?
Sure.
It seems like it's great credit. I don't know.
So I would say the IG primary markets are open for a wide range of issuers, right?
Okay.
Banks historically do issue post earnings, but so do a host of other companies, right? The IG market is $7.5 trillion, so anyone's always issuing at any given point in time, depending on the earnings cadence. I think the reason that we see financials as attractive, historically, financials for a long period of the post-financial crisis era actually traded tight to industrials. They're still a little bit wide, so we see some room for spreads to mean revert. On top of that, it's a services-based industry, so potentially less vulnerable to potential tariffs, higher input costs from shipping widgets across international waters, for example. We are expecting, our colleagues in the BlackRock Investment Institute are expecting some deregulation as part of this new administration.
Institute?
Yes,
Is that the research department?
we do have a BlackRock Investment Institute, which they put out great Research. They're expecting deregulation. We expect a rebound in M&A, capital markets activity now that we've passed this clearing event and have some certainty. So financials, we think, has more room to run in terms of outperformance versus non-fins.
When you translate what Jean Bovin says, let me editorialize, folks, future Bank of Canada governor, chairman of the Fed, et cetera. When you translate Jean Bovin's shop, are you clipping a coupon, or can you find total return in this madness?
Great point, Tom.
Can I go home? Okay.
We are emphasizing yield and carry in terms of total returns and credit, not total return based on tightening in interest rates and the benefit from duration. So you can get total return a few different ways. You can kind of clip the coupon as you're suggesting. You can earn the yield, which has been attractive historically because the base rate is boosted. We are not expecting a material rate cutting cycle from the Fed. We think that there will be a cut of 25 basis points in December, but we think once we get into 2025, it's much more uncertain. We think comments from the Fed on the neutral rate at that point will become very important. So because we're expecting a rather shallow cutting cycle, we're not expecting a big total return benefit, for example, from a decline in interest rates, which would mechanically boost the total returns of fixed rate debt. That's also the reason why we like floating rate credit. You're earning a yield pickup, for example, in single B leveraged loans versus single B high yield bonds, which is historically attractive, but then also you just don't have that duration exposure in leveraged loans.
If you want a window into Amanda Line and what she just said there, folks, your head is spinning. What did she say? The Bible. And she sounded just like Sidney Homer and Marty Leibowitz. Inside the yield book is the classic window into what Amanda Lynham just said of BlackRock. Paul?
I look at the INGO function on the Bloomberg terminal, the Bloomberg Index browser, and I look across fixed income. It's green. That's good news for you guys. You're actually making some money this year. But boy, U.S. corporate high yield has blown away everything. It's up 8.15% year-to-date return. What happened there?
So it's an incredibly growth-sensitive asset class, even more than IG credit. If you look at spreads versus real GDP, for example, you can see that they're moving in tandem. So the high-yield market is telling you that it's taking comfort from the pace of above-trend growth in the U.S. But again, that pace of growth will be key to validating that spreads. What happened, Paul, is that you've had a higher yield that you've, to Tom's question, you've had a higher yield that you've been able to capture because of the elevated risk-free rate. But high-yield spreads have tightened to 253 basis points, and importantly, all buckets of the quality spectrum have contributed, so even have triple Cs. And so that has been, it's been a very risk-on rally.
So people that don't agree with Ed Yardeni are going to say the stocks are priced to perfection. Can you state, or a bond bear state, you're not a bond bear, but can a bond bear state bonds are priced to perfection?
In terms of corporate credit, we've definitely baked in an above-trend pace of growth and a continuation of strong fundamentals. What we've actually written this morning is that we think the biggest risk to corporate credit is a disorderly sell-off in Treasury yields. So not a backup in Treasury yields that's gradual, driven by higher growth, but rather a more volatile one, similar to what we saw in the fall of 2023. If we had a situation like that, not our base case, but something we're watching closely, that may discourage yield-based investors from deploying capital into corporate credit. It's been a really strong, powerful tailwind for us so far this year. So we don't want to see that tailwind go away, but that's really the key risk that we're watching. I would say, Tom, we could stay at these tight spread levels for a while. We were here last in 2021, so it wasn't that long ago, and the yield backdrop then was much lower, so it was actually less supportive for yield-based investors.
My chart of the year is the Amanda Lynham chart. Bob Michael over at another firm, a small bank, they're building a building on Park Avenue. Bob Michael and I were yapping away, and I made this chart up in my head, and it's a corporate index, which was -6 standard deviations. What that means is Lynham's out of a job. Okay, -6 standard deviations, and we've recovered 2.5 standard deviations. Does that trend continue over the next 24 months for bond investors?
I mean, I think really what would hinge on that is stabilization in the Treasury. So if we do have stabilization in Treasury yields, you would still have that support from yield-based buyers. But again, the key risk is a disorderly sell-off in Treasury yields because of upward pressure on inflation, for example, right? Something we're watching very closely. That's really the key risk. But I think we can stay in this tight spread range.
Get one more in here. Amy Morris is watching Deadpool Wolverine down in Washington.
Disney
Get
earnings.
one more in here.
sectors other than
Yes.
financials, is there a sector that jumps out at you guys or screens well for you
Well,
guys?
financials work. They're 22% of 22%
index?
of the U.S. IG market value. So
Okay.
if that's banks
Yep.
are 22%, financials are 33%.
Okay.
So to your question, Tom, can we move tighter from this? If we're right that financials work, that's a third of the IG index market value. We could be tighter than 74 basis points, right, if that cooperates. So I think that's really the one we're focused on most. The other sectors, Paul, will determine on what the ultimate outcome for tariffs looks like.
You in Boston tomorrow?
I would love to be, but I'm not planning on it yet.
Well, please,
Sounds lovely. Yeah.
Please come to Boston. Emma and Alina,
you.
thank you so much. Macro credit research at BlackRock is, well, futures up 5. The VIX, a print of 13 yesterday on the VIX, 14.12. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
Thank you, Tom. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says most of Donald Trump's nominations so far are good ones, except for one.
Gates won't get confirmed. Everybody knows that. Gates couldn't win in a Republican conference, so it doesn't matter.
McCarthy says Trump's other nominations will send a clear message to the world that America won't be pushed around. Now, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz resigned from the House just after Donald Trump tapped him to serve as Attorney General. This as the House Ethics Panel was set to vote to release a report that's critical of Gaetz. The committee has been investigating allegations that Gaetz engaged in sexual misconduct and illicit drug use. Multiple news outlets report lawmakers were ready to vote on releasing that report to the public tomorrow. Gates' resignation effectively ends the investigation. Former Secretary of State John Kerry says the incoming Trump administration can take advantage of the work that the Biden administration has done regarding the conflict in the Middle East. Kerry tells Bloomberg that a lot of the work has been done to bring Saudi Arabia to the table to recognize Israel.
It depends hugely, if not entirely, on how you approach the question of Gaza, how you begin to deal with the Palestinian future, and there's a lot to nibble on. But it is a table that has been set for negotiation.
Former Secretary of State John Kerry on the sideline of the Barclays Asia Forum in Singapore. More than 1 million migrants are living and working legally in the U.S. under temporary protected status. They are from 17 countries the U.S. has deemed unsafe, but President-elect Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, have suggested they would scale back the use of TPS under their new administration. Advocates say that's creating anxiety for those who have been shielded from deportation. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. Paul, Dan Ives in the building, his entourage.
Yep.
I mean, they destroyed the food court upstairs. I'm looking at Apple, and it's basically gone nowhere since the 4th of July.
Okay.
And yet there's all this fanboy buzz out there about their new toys, the new computers, the new this, the new, new.
Yeah, sure.
Is it working?
It's less of a. I think what I hear from the Dan Ives of the world, it's less of a, what's the new product coming, than just what's the revenue and earnings growth of this company going forward, and what do they do with the free cash flow. It's less of what is the new product, and is that going to drive units. It's kind of just about the whole story. Service is 20% of their revenue, and it's such a profitable part of their business that just cranks out so much cash flow. But I'm not sure,
The share buybacks have been on, plan
buybacks
as well.
are crazy. Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking
but
at
no dividend to speak of note.
Yeah, I mean, well, but the
Call
share.
that every time.
I'm sorry, the share buybacks.
Amazing.
How many? There's like 4,000 people that cover Apple.
Yep.
No, seriously, folks, 57 plus 3, 60 people cover Apple.
That's it's just one of the
You
examples
used
of what's
to be
wrong
in the
with Wall
game.
Street.
What do you do on
Yeah.
a conference call? Hey, Tim, great quarter.
Exactly.
He doesn't even know who he's talking to, right?
I can say without reservation, in 35 years, I never said that on a conference call. But again, I think if you're Tim Cook, you're just like, hey, this thing is a behemoth. It's an aircraft carrier, and it's cash. It's free cash.
John Fair and I were laughing. The Fed decides, and we're just waiting for somebody within the Fed press conference to go,
Great
hey,
quarter."
Jerome, great quarter.
Exactly.
That has not happened yet, but someday it will. Futures up 7, Dow futures up 105 from New York. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen. This is after the October Consumer Price Index keeps the door open for the Federal Reserve officials to cut interest rates at their meeting next month. Today, the focus will shift to PPI. That's 8:30 Wall Street time, and also jobless claims for last week. So right now, NASDAQ futures up about 9 points. Dow futures up 105. S&P futures up about 6. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that is little changed. Bitcoin extended its rally briefly, topping 93,000 before starting to trim its gains. Right now, it's at about 91,000. Few companies making news. Ben & Jerry's suing its parent company Unilever, silencing it on advocating for Palestinian rights. That's the reason there. And then Merck, it's licensed an experimental cancer drug from a closely held Chinese company. It's a deal worth up to $3.3 billion. And finally, Nippon Steel's vice president set to meet with steel workers representing the unions that run United States Steel Corp's plants in Pittsburgh next week. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, PPI today, no big deal, I guess. I'm not going to sell it to the audience, but I am going to sell tomorrow. Retail sales is not a small matter. That seems to be the tip point of where it's, oops, growth is better than we think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, retail sales tomorrow, the expectation, Tom, is for a growth for the month of October, 0.3%, which would be a little bit less than last month.
You sound like McKee.
I got ECO.
I have no idea what that number means.
Exactly. I got ECO. That makes me sound smart. We got ECO Go on the Bloomberg terminal. It gives you all the economic data points you need.
We got a retail sales expert, Lisa Mateo, here. What are you seeing at Costco? Is it more crowded than it's ever been?
It actually, because of the holidays, that's where everyone gets their Christmas gifts. So that's where I got to go there.
Okay, you're going to Costco this weekend?
Yeah, I got to stock up
Couple
on the Christmas
bars
gifts.
of gold?
No, not.
But the hot dog and a soda is $1.50?
Still, and you get free refills. I'm telling you.
Wow.
But
most of the last time you had a hot dog.
I never had it.
She's never.
Oh my God, there goes the Costco margin.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages, the Lisa Mateo Hour, is brought to you by IBKR with the Interactive Brokers. Their forecast trader, you can trade your views on key economic and key climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast. Get started today. ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Start strong, Lisa. What do you have?
All right, I'm probably going to get you in trouble for this, but a new place to take Mrs. Keene shopping. This is a temporary Louis Vuitton store. It's on Billionaires Row in Manhattan. Okay, nice. The flagship store is across the street. They're getting renovated, so now they have this temporary store opening. But it's got the 50-foot ceilings. It has Le Café, where you can sit down for luxury snacking.
That's the biggest racket going.
You don't want the waffles with caviar for $48?
Are you serious?
Yes. I'm telling you, a cheeseburger, $32. It has a bar. It has a library space. So it's all there for you to just relax.
But this temporary store is going to be there for like a couple of years, right?
A couple years, yes.
They're complete. Folks, in New York City, it is iconic and this time of year special. 57th Street at 5th Avenue. Yep. And Lisa, to be clear, they're tearing down their corner store, is that right?
They're renovating. It's going to take a couple of years.
And rebuilding it up.
And rebuilding it up. So now they're in the former Nike Nike used to be in that
I know
place.
where that is. Okay,
yeah.
very.
So they're in there now.
Tiffany was in there before, and they own Tiffany now.
Yes, correct. You are correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Tom's familiar with that.
He knows that.
Yeah, exactly.
But they'll still have the shopping, jewelry, accessories, menswear, yes, women's wear.
I learned yesterday Van Cleef is taking a firm. That's the modern. Van Cleef is a thing with gold and stones from Africa. I don't know what. It's jewelry I can't afford.
Okay.
And they're taking a firm, which shocked me in that European luxuries figuring out a firm and all the rest of the stuff that everybody buys with today.
Okay.
Can we move on?
Luxury.
We can. I hope Mrs. Keene was listening. Okay. We've been talking about, if you want to date someone, just go to a bar. What happened with that whole thing, okay? A lot of singles are taking that into consideration. The Wall Street Journal had this great insight into it. They're saying singles are forgetting the dating apps. They want to go out, but their skills are a little rusty. They don't know how to go out and talk to people. They don't know how to make eye contact. They think it's awkward. They say social norms around dating is not the same. People think it's creepy when you approach someone. And they say that
describes me from about 1971 on.
So they don't. They haven't developed the dating skills. Is that kind of what
they forgot?
Okay.
Like it's been so long,
All right.
and they had the dating apps, and they were just used to someone kind of picking it for them. So they're saying it's hard to go in a bar and make eye contact because everyone's on their phone and no one's paying attention. They're just
the phone's
on their phone.
Seriously, the phone is a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they did have some advice. So here's the advice from the dating
All
coach,
right,
okay? You put away your phone, you remove your earbuds, you smile, and you say, I don't believe we've met yet.
Oh, that would work.
Did it work? No?
That would work.
That's what they're saying.
The kids
So
got to get back in the game.
I don't know.
I don't believe we've met yet.
Yes, that's the best they've got.
Let's Ken, is that how the Feliu family started? No, no, it is not.
Believe we've met
Another
yet.
bar story with our global technical director. Continue.
Big thing happening today, the last supermoon of the year,
Saw
okay?
that last night,
Hitting
yeah.
peak illumination. Yeah, you've already seen it because it's already started, to come out.
It's like
it came
full
before
moon today.
sunrise. Yes, correct. It came out this morning. It'll continue before a few hours, sunrise Sunday. But the biggest peak, if you want to see it, the biggest, the brightest, it's 4:29 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So keep that in your calendars. But full moon's in November. It's the beaver moon. And so why they call it the beaver moon, it's not exactly clear the origin, but it's actually because mid-fall is when the hunters set beaver traps before the swamps start to freeze over. That's where it came from.
Font of wisdom.
The beaver's more active in November.
With full moons, do you see a bigger tide?
That's a great question.
That is a
I don't
good
know.
question.
I don't know.
I
But
don't
I will be
notice it, but-
4:29 tomorrow. I will be at the
You will
Jersey
be at the
Shore.
beach.
I will be at the
You
beach.
will give us a
I'm getting
full
the early
report.
flight back from Boston tomorrow, so be back. At
You
the
have the
beach.
Gulf Stream?
Yes, I do. We'll be zipping
Are you
right into
going
Belmar
Middletown
Airport.
or Teterboro?
Belmar.
Belmar?
Yeah, that's
Jeez,
the local
at
airport by
least,
my place.
I
Not
just,
bad.
I can't even get on the Acela. I'm on the slow train tomorrow. I get back like 9 p.m. Next.
Okay, finally, Mark Zuckerberg teaming up with rapper T-Pain. It's a new version of a hit Lil Jon song, but he's not rapping, okay? But if you remember, back in 2002, Lil Jon, the East Side Boys, came out with Get Low. So here it is if you want to hear it from back in the day. All right. Okay, that was the original, 2002. But Mark Zuckerberg, he was a big fan of the song, okay? But when he first met his wife, Priscilla, it was playing 21 years ago. That's how they fell in love, apparently. So every year he plays it on their anniversary. But he wanted to do something different this year. So he teamed up with T-Pain to do a little remake. Take a listen. Okay, so he's not rapping, as you can tell, but he has the vocals. He's a little crooner. It has the raw lyrics. What I had to cut out. It was very hard to edit. Yes, yeah. It's very raw. It sounds beautiful, but his wife called it very romantic.
Oh, that was romantic.
Yes, she said it was very romantic.
Okay. I didn't know this. I'm glad you brought this up because Afterthoughts calling me T-Pain at home. And it's not. It's about the dishwasher and the unloading of said dishwasher. I'm T-Pain.
Mark Zuckerberg.
It's Tallahassee Pain. That's
Is
where
it?
it comes from.
Okay. Tallahassee.
I learned Lisa. Seriously, every time you come on, I learn something.
You're welcome.
It's great. What was the line to pick up in a bar?
I don't believe we've met yet.
Lisa Mateo with the newspapers today. You can't do better than that. Lisa Mateo there, and of course we're from Boston tomorrow. Lisa Mateo driving the show forward here in New York. Futures up 4, Dow futures up 87. I mean, Paul, after the show, you're going back. I'm staying up. I'm going either to the Channel or to Paradise.
Are you?
Those are the two clubs from years ago.
Okay, back in the day.
The Channel.
Very
regular.
Boston. All right, very good.
The whole.
Yeah, we've got a
music
reservation
scene
for
up
dinner
there.
somewhere tonight. I can't remember where.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll be going
I'm at lunch tomorrow, Lockovers.
There you go.
From Boston tomorrow, Susan Collins with Michael McKee. Good morning, 92.9 FM Boston, worldwide, Bloomberg Surveillance.
talking in your sleep. I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to feed. I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to please.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mr. Barr on assignment. Mateo in attendance today. Amy Morris helping out in Washington. Red and green on the screen. The VIX, it's a bull market VIX, a 13 print yesterday. 14.14 on the VIX. Just the churning here, the politics. Balance of power, what, 12 noon today?
Yep.
More on Washington.
Kaylee Lines.
Coming up, the most important conversation on the disaggregation of the American polity. David Blanchflower to be with us. Can't wait. I mean, I got ducky bumps here right now because Blanchflower is coming on from Dartmouth. Let's get right to it. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to YouTube in your morning commute across the nation from Los Angeles to Hanover, New Hampshire. We're brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover optimization strategies that are helping CFOs to make their finance function more competitive, more resilient. Talk to Cohn Resnick's advisors. We thank Cohn Resnick for their support. Right now, from the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got Oh, there we go. As we got little
First
movement,
day in the
blue
studio?
button,
Come on.
gotta do it. Little movement this morning. Futures, the latest read of inflation. It's showing consumer prices still holding firm. Today, the focus, we shift to producer price index as well as weekly jobless claims. Tomorrow, we go to retail sales, manufacturing, import prices, and industrial production. All right, so we have NASDAQ futures up about 2 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, about 95 points. S&P futures little changed, up about 4. We have the 2-year yield, 4.28%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.44%, and that is little change. To currencies, we have the dollar stronger. We have Japanese yen fell further against the dollar to the weakest level since July, right now to 155.96 against the dollar. Then you have the euro dropping below 105 for the first time since October 2023. Right now, the euro at 105.36 against the dollar. Bitcoin extending its rally, briefly topping 93,000 before starting to trim back those gains. Right now, it's at about 91,000. Crypto Crypto-related stocks like Coinbase Global up 4%, MicroStrategy up 3%. To earnings, let's hit Disney up 9%. Its film studio streaming business drove earnings growth. And then we go to Advance Auto down 4%. Net sales for the quarter missed estimates. It also plans to close about 500 stores. After the bell, we move on to Applied Materials. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. I have anticipated this discussion. Paul wants to talk tariffs with Professor Blanchflower of Dartmouth College, but I'm going to go back. David, I can't believe I'm saying this. Danny Blanchflower with us from Dartmouth. 30 years, The Wage Curve was his book. It changed the discussion of aggregation. Do you sum everything together, or do you have the courage to disaggregate? Like Blanchflower is saying, how does the fact that people can migrate from New Mexico to New Hampshire change our economics? David Blanchflower, John Edwards stood on a lawn in Louisiana, and he said there's two Americas. This political election we just had, what does it say about two Americas, our disaggregation?
Well, what a great question, Tom. I mean, I think the question going forward is whether people are going to be able to deliver on what they say they plan to do, and whether the people who voted for things are going to get what they expect. And I think the answer to that is it's pretty darned unlikely. I mean, we're going to talk a bit about tariffs. We're also going to talk about inflation and unemployment. And I worked on this, Tom, with the sort of analysis that I did, and the evidence there was that people really didn't like unemployment. Roughly a 1 percentage point rise in unemployment was 5 times worse than a 1 percentage point rise in inflation. Well, that turns out to be wrong. And I think the way I would think of it is, I never really expected to be saying this, people seem to really not like inflation. So if that's what you really don't like, then it must mean that you really prefer unemployment. And so we have this great dilemma. Well, okay, if inflation's bad, then there's ways we can get rid of it. The ways we can get rid of it is to raise interest rates and to generate unemployment, and that will get inflation down. So I think that's really interesting. The other thing which is kind of interesting, I think, as an old-time central banker, is that inflation is not what people are really focused on. They've actually focused on price levels. So price levels are the big deal. Right. Even though you talk about inflation being relatively low, the way I always think of it, prices are 100 in year one, they go to 110, inflation's 10%, and then in the next year it goes to 110, inflation's 0. But everybody's hung up. So we're really in a world where essentially people, I don't think, express things in quite the way they think the consequences that are coming. And if you impose tariffs, we'll talk about that too. So this is a world of, oh my goodness me, I didn't really understand this. But if you voted for this, then there's going to be consequences.
Well, let's do this.
You may not like the consequences.
Paul wants to get to tariffs with Danny Blanchflower. Yeah. The book, folks, more accessible, is not working. Where have all the good jobs gone? That's the heart of Blanchflower's recent.
That's the heart of it, Paul.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that you go back to the heart of it, I think, is where have all the good-paying jobs gone? And in a sense, I think what you see is a big bunch of America says we have not been doing well. We've had inflation rising. We have our pace not kept pace with it, and it's a shout and a cry for help. But obviously there are issues we've heard people talk about. Oh well, we'll abolish Obamacare and we'll go after Social Security and we'll go after Medicaid and all kinds of things. How any of that is actually intended to help the well-being of the working man and woman it's a part. I mean,
well,
these are all
Danny, let's get Paul Sweeney in here because he understands that Harvard beat Dartmouth in football.
Exactly.
Paul?
Hey, Danny,
I know, but we beat Princeton last week.
Danny, just for our listeners, for our viewers, Danny, tariffs. Can you give us your 3 cents on tariffs? What do they do? What do they not do?
Well, my good pal who's in the office 2 doors from me, Doug Irwin, taught me most of what I know, and I think taught Tom most of what he knows too. I mean, the story I always had in my head was that free trade's a really good idea. I mean, I come from the UK, as you gather, and obviously I've seen Brexit. Brexit was essentially free trade between a big group of countries, with a barrier outside it. And the UK voted, which I think is the worst economic suicide note ever written, to go to Brexit. And what we're going to see here is essentially, well, if this happens, we're going to see tariffs. And what tariffs do is it generates winners and it generates losers. So winners would be those who see suddenly the price of goods rising. And so there are rents to share. So imagine if you raise the price of cars, then the unions say, well, this is great because I can raise my wages because the price of cars have risen and I'm going to do really well. So the people for whom prices rise, they're going to do well. But for the consumer, prices will rise and that will hurt them. And the big question, and I think we should talk a little bit about, is, well, first, what are other countries going to do? Is Mexico going to retaliate? Is China going to retaliate? And then second, well, can you go to substitute? So I've been through 3 hurricanes in the last 3 years, 2.5 years. And one of the big things I recall was that, tariffs rose on aluminum. Well, what happened? Well, nobody's buying aluminum windows anymore. They all buy acrylic. Right? So the question is, can you substitute from those things? And in the long run, is there going to be import substitution where you end up making your own stuff? But this is such a long run process that this is chaos.
Danny, I got to get one more question in here before you go off to fight with Irwin today. Are we entering, even though we don't know it, just a further monopsony where there's a power of big business, a power of big corporations, a power of the rich guys with this election?
Well, it certainly seems that way. I mean, I gather Elon Musk has moved into Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it certainly seems that way. But I do think that, in a sense, the lesson I would draw in some ways from the UK, and the lesson I draw from Liz Truss, is that actually, yes, that may be true, but markets do stop people doing stupid stuff. So think about Liz Truss passes a set of stuff on the Friday and basically is done on Monday. So markets will respond to things. People will respond. So yes, that there's going to be one heck of a set of conflict and chaos going on. Right. But I agree.
Danny,
it does look like.
We got to go. We got to go, Danny. But I promise me, I want you to come on next Bank of England meeting to push against Catherine Mann trying to keep rates high in the United Kingdom. That's like Cardiff.
That will get me going.
That will get him going. That's like Cardiff taking on Man City. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
But I would always lose that game, so I would hope that he win this one.
Professor, thank you so much. Right. Danny Blanchflower with us from Dartmouth College there, just outstanding on the wage of America. Futures up 5 with our news in Washington. Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Tom. President-elect Donald Trump has yet to pick a nominee for Treasury Secretary. The Wall Street Journal reporting Howard Lutnick wants the job, reporting that the Cantor Fitzgerald CEO has gone directly to Donald Trump about that position. Lutnick was the co-chair of Trump's transition team. Earlier this week, Trump tapped Elon Musk to help head a new project to clear away government inefficiencies. Critics say it is a conflict to have Musk, who runs 6 companies, including Tesla, X, SpaceX, to be involved in the administration. Former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, disagrees with that.
Elon doesn't benefit from government. America has benefited from Elon. And for Elon to sacrifice his time away from business because he cares about a country that opened up those arms that he immigrated to, that we are so proud of. People who benefit is Americans from Elon. It's not the other way around.
Kevin McCarthy made those comments in an interview with Bloomberg at the Barclays Asia Forum in Singapore. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Amy, thanks so much. George Will in the Washington Post, what you agree or disagree with him? A spirited, smart column and look at the history of tariffs. And he had one vignette there, Paul, that I think really goes to your question to Professor Blanchflower. George Will said, tariffs are like if you're setting up a blockade of your own harbor. You think about the Napoleonic Wars when the British blockaded the French harbors. No, what if the British had blockaded their own harbors?
Right.
I mean that to me is like a really nice image of it.
Exactly, and I think many of our listeners and viewers, we kind of grew up in a time of internationalism, and so this nationalism of the last number of years has kind of flown in the face of that. But again, there's been some reshoring, friendshoring of certain industries that has probably been good for the U.S. economy. So I'll see how this plays out and see what kind of, as Professor Blanchflower was talking about, the retaliation we get from some of these other countries. What does that mean for the consumer?
I mean, we're going to be there at the Boston Fed tomorrow.
Yep.
And we're going to be looking out the windows. I mean, we're not, Michael
At the
McKee's
harbor,
talking
yep.
to Susan Collins, but we're looking out at the harbor where there were tariffs. In 1773, the colonists had to pay 3 pennies on every pound of tea.
Tea, yep.
And this ended with the Boston Tea Party.
I remember that, yeah.
And as Ken Pruitt would say to me, the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
That's what they called it.
Yep.
That's Stan Freberg, folks, for those of you who have a different, no one has a clue what I'm talking about with the pursuit of happiness. Ken Pruitt and I used to do Stan Freberg monologues.
Okay.
From the 50s.
Yeah. How'd that go?
It was very good. They switched the bird at Thanksgiving. It was supposed to be the eagle that was cooked.
Yep.
But it was the turkey that was cooked.
The turkey. I prefer the turkey.
You cooked the wrong bird.
Yeah, exactly.
Stan Freberg again. Good morning, everyone. Tomorrow we're in Boston for the pursuit of happiness. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen after new data showed inflation stayed firm, but analysts are saying, well, it's just not enough to stop interest rate cut from the Fed next month. We'll see. Well, now traders are waiting PPI data about 15 minutes from now and a speech from Chair Jay Powell later this afternoon. So right now we have NASDAQ futures, little change up about 13 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 116 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 7 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that is little change. To commodities, we have Brent crude higher, up more than 1% at $73 a barrel. WTI crude $69 a barrel, and spot gold lower, $2,555 an ounce. Quick check of Disney shares right now. They're down. They're up about 8%. And we head you over to luxury news. Capri, that's the company behind Michael Kors. You have Tapestry, the owner of Coach, Kate Spade. They have both ended their $8.5 billion plan to merge. Tapestry Treasury planning to buy back $6.1 billion of bonds that it sold to fund that now block purchase. We have Capri down about 5%, Tapestry up 7%. LVMH reshuffled its leadership. It's returning Bernard Arnault's son, Alexandra, to its Paris headquarters from Tiffany. Those shares up about 1% in Paris. And finally, shares of Burberry, they're up 21% in London. Its CEO announced plans overhauling the brand after it reported a 20% drop in comparable retail sales. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The heritage of Bloomberg Surveillance is a global heritage, and some of the most important interviews and moments we've had have been from Tokyo, from Japan, and I think of Robbie Feldman at Morgan Stanley, among others that we've talked to. It is now an honor to bring in here, folks, somebody that Mr. Buffett would listen to. Mr. Buffett, if you're listening in Omaha, Nebraska this morning on your morning commute, if he is doing that, an important conversation. Masa Takeda is with Hennessy Japan out of Sparks, Hong Kong, and he manages money in Japan. Wonderful to have you here. What does Warren Buffett see in Japan that you see in Japan, given decades of malperformance, decades of demographic challenges? Where's the optimism on Japan?
Right. So I think the single biggest driver of the Japanese market today is not about the currency. It's really about the changing corporate governance standards in Japan, and that means increasing focus on capital efficiency in businesses, because there was no such focus before. Finally, things are starting to change thanks to the government initiative under Abenomics about 10 years ago, and then finally the world has come to realize that something is going on from 2 years ago.
What are the Japanese consumers doing? Are they spending money? Do they sense that the economy is on firmer footing? What do you sense from the Japanese consumer?
I think at this juncture, I think we're at a crossroads, although I'm leaning towards more positive outlook. So inflation has been in place for the last 2 years, but real wage growth has not been keeping pace with it. So if this will continue, then it might become just a stagflation. But there's the nationwide wage increase campaign that's also being led by the government, and that's the first time we've seen. It's the first time we're seeing it. So that's, I think, the basis for our optimism.
CFA 101 is a strong dollar doesn't help Americans with international investment. Do you partition Japan? I mean, Philippine peso's out to a 58.59 this morning. You could pick any other currency pair off the Trump election. Dollar's stronger. Do you partition Japan with strong dollar, weak Pacific Rim currencies, or can you look at Japan discrete and separate?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. But the way I look at JPY, whether you like it or not, you remember back in August we had the massive sell-off as a result of the unwinding.
Yeah, it was your fault. You were selling it. We knew you were selling in Hong Kong.
The reason for that is obviously JPY is pretty much the only currency among major economies with negative real interest rates. And so, and for the time being, the BOJ is looking at accommodative monetary policy framework. So I think the currency will remain as the funding currency of carry trades, but it's a good thing for us as an investor because it creates a lot of mispricing in the securities. So it creates a lot of market volatility. You have to live with it.
Talk about volatility. I'm just looking at the Nikkei 225 index. From kind of mid-July to early August, it fell 25%. It's regained a lot of that, but that volatility, I think, took a lot of people by surprise here. What happened? Just give us a sense of what happened, and how does it inform your outlook going forward?
So obviously, it was triggered by the unwinding of speculative trading, and I just explained why the yen is a preferred currency for that. Obviously, carrying trade, when it's unwound, it doesn't really follow the normal distribution, right? And so it's a long tail risk. And, so Japan always, when there's risk on, short the yen, buy stock, risk off, vice versa. But the way I make case for Japan is, Japan is not about currency, it's not about the economy. Although economy, we're increasingly seeing signs of positive inflation and normalization of interest rates. But at the end of the day, it's the corporate governance reforms.
Right. Could you please, Masa, link? I mean, you have to understand that to our viewers, our sum total knowledge of your portfolio structure is to rewatch Shogun. I mean, that's how out of whack we are here. The LDP just lost big.
Yep.
Fold that into CEO. Hitachi's a major holding. Don't comment on Hitachi, but fold that into CEO behavior forward and how Japan deals domestically and Japan deals with China. After this LDP loss, what do the CEOs on that famous street in Kyoto, what do?
Well, so we, as a bottom-up stock picker ourselves, we are agnostic about the macro environment, including political landscape. And as I said, this trend of improvements in capital efficiency of the country, return on equity has gone from 5% to close to 10%. And I think we're still in the early innings, and that will continue on regardless of who the political leader might be.
Can you sustain a nominal? We're running out of time, unfortunately, Masa. Can you sustain a nominal GDP, real GDP, plus this new jury-rigged inflation component? Can you sustain nominal GDP into revenue growth for Japan equities?
I think so. I mean, it's the nominal profit growth that matters to investors. And there was no inflation before, and therefore nominal growth rate was not as attractive as it should be. Now with inflation, that will add another maybe 1 to 2% of real profit, real growth rate of profits.
I got to get a yen call out of you. Come on, does yen go through 160? Come on.
I don't have a crystal ball on this, but I think the yen will remain as a cheap currency for the time being because of the rates.
We're not going to see yen to 130, 120.
That I have no idea. But the balance of payments also supports the argument that the yen will likely remain cheap for the time being.
30 seconds. Tell me about your Hong Kong. What do you see in Hong Kong into 2025 without getting into trouble?
I'm a foreigner in Hong Kong, so I cannot really speak for the locals, but things have come back to normal pretty much, although I think the composition of Hong Kong population has shifted a little bit. Probably there are more mainlanders and less foreign expats, but that does not mean economy will slow down. So that's the current situation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
this has been wonderful. Don't be a stranger. Let's get this. We can do this in your evening. We can do this in 7 p.m. evening call. Masa Takeda, thank you so much. Hennessy Japan Fund, of course, with Sparks Hong Kong. Paul, this is something we don't. Warren Buffett is looking at Japan, and we're not.
No. And when I started in the business in the mid-'80s, you had to go to Tokyo.
Well said.
And have but then it kind of fell off the map for a while.
There's a lift to the market. It's not a big lift, but excuse me. And the VIX 14.10. We're in Boston tomorrow. Good morning. 92.9 FM Boston. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We are just moments away from PPI for October, initial jobless claims for last week. Ahead of it right now, we have NASDAQ futures, little change, up about 16 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, about 140 points. S&P futures up about 0.1%, or 6 points. We have the two-year yield at 4.26%. That's down 1 basis point. All right, the numbers coming in. So PPI, this is for month over month. The survey was for 0.2%, came in right on target, 0.2%. Now, when you take food and energy out of the picture month over month, the survey was for 0.2%, came in a bit higher, about 0.3%. If you want to go year over year, it was for 2.3%. That was the expectation, coming in at 2.4%. And then taking food and energy out of the picture again, it was for 3%. That was the expectation, came in a little bit higher at 3.1%. We go to initial jobless claims for last week. The survey was for 220,000, came in 217,000, so a little bit lower. The prior was for 221,000. We'll wait for revisions on those. Market reaction, a little bit of a shift here. We have NASDAQ futures going slightly lower, down about 2 points. Dow futures up still 0.2%, 118 points. S&P futures little changed, up about 3 points. Checking back in with shares of Disney. Got to do that right now. Shares up 9%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
They're the revisions right now, Lisa, coming in a little bit behind, and they're a little bit tick higher in inflation. I'm looking at the 10-year real yield, 2.08%. Needless to say, on growth, elevated. Our economic indicators, including important retail sales tomorrow, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor-to-staff ratio. Small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to Commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support and technology. We thank Commonwealth for the support. Note, we'll be in Boston tomorrow. Good morning, 92.9 FM. Susan Collins in conversation with Michael McKee, the highlight. Tried to get Simon Johnson on. He's busy.
Okay.
Can't talk to the Nobel laureate. He's been such a supporter. But we got some great guests lined up. Thoughtful conversation from the Boston Fed. For those of you on YouTube, you can immediately see that when the facts changed, she said, Wendy Schiller in red today of the Taubman Center, joining us, of course, professor of civics for all of America. Wendy, what a perfect time to talk to you about the heritage of Senate independence. John Thune is labeled a rhino, but talk to me, take me from, say, in the modern era, from Senator Byrd of West Virginia over to the senator from the Dakotas. How independent is Senate independence?
Well, Tom, the Senate has the capacity to be totally independent from the president and even, very independent from the House. But partisanship has enveloped our sort of separation of powers and our branches of government in the last 20 to 25 years. So that this institutional break between the president is elected separately. It's unlike most of the other industrialized countries of the world, where the majority party in the legislature chooses the prime minister who runs the country. So we have separation, and the partisanship has really shrunk that separation. So now, when you run for the House and when you run for the Senate, especially if you're Republican, you really have to swear an oath of allegiance to the presidential candidate and promise to carry out their agenda in a way that is really more pronounced than it's ever been before. Excuse me.
So, Professor, taking that as a backdrop here, how do you think about some of these cabinet appointments that we've seen from President-elect Trump here? It seems to be, I guess, one of the commonalities is loyalty, professed loyalty to President Trump. What do you make of some of his appointments?
Yeah, I mean, this is really, in a second term, you'd expect sort of a president to have made connections and replace the first set of cabinet people with a sort of more loyal group in a second term. That's not, something that's surprising. Up until yesterday, I was saying this looks like any other Republican administration, George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. These nominees would be fairly typical for anybody. So I found that a little bit surprising, given that Trump is not typical in any way. But, with Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz on the list, one to run the intelligence and one to run, be the nation's top law enforcement officer, that was surprising. And that sort of suggests to me that he's using that Justice Department nomination to really get back at people who investigated him.
Right.
We'll see if Matt Gaetz gets confirmed. He did resign from the House yesterday, so that's pretty big confidence that he's going to get confirmed. Will the Senate exercise its advice and consent?
Right.
Constitutional responsibility. That's the big
Okay,
question.
we'll get out the Brown University crystal ball here. I mean, Wendy Schiller, what are we going to observe? Are we going to have like Sam Ervin and Howard Baker in a smoke-filled Senate room, and Mr. Gaetz is going to sit there with X number of people lined up, Republicans and Democrats, and what do they do? Do they ask him questions? How does the process work? What will we visually see?
Well, Tom and Paul, I can tell you that I'm not sure you'll visually see anything. It really depends on how John Thune, who's now been elected as the Senate Republican leader, can withstand the Trump pressure to really adjourn and let him just do recess appointments, which would make these people sort of temporary until the end of the Congress in 2026. That Trump likes that. He likes a little bit of instability in his cabinet. So I don't know if the Senate can withstand that pressure. If they don't, they'll have very quick softball hearings in the first week after Trump is inaugurated, probably, and get these cabinet nominees, situated within just maybe a week or two. You will not see extended hearings. Trump will put too much pressure on Thune. And if Thune wants to maintain that constitutional prerogative in the face of that pressure, he'll have to act very quickly to confirm all of Trump's picks.
Paul wants to jump in here, but I got to ask this. So you're telling me within the maelstrom right now that Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard and Attorney Gaetz will go through a normal process?
Well, when I say normal, I don't mean a deep and thoughtful investigation and hearings. But I think that Thune, in order to maintain the Senate's bargaining power with the president at all, what's the point of being a senator if you're just going to sort of lay down and say, forget it, we're not going to do any of our constitutional responsibilities? It's not much fun. I mean, I can't imagine most senators want to act that way, but he will have to get these things through very quickly because Trump has a lot of momentum right now. And, each of these leaders in these Congresses, they depend on Trump. Mike Johnson, John Thune, if Trump really raises a ruckus, who knows if the Senate Republicans stay with Thune? So it's a very unstable time. So they have to appease the president and try to maintain their constitutional powers. We're going to see just how good John Thune is at that in the coming months.
Professor, are there checks and balances in this government here? We've got a Republican president, Senate, now House, and one could argue a Supreme Court. Are there viable checks and balances on this president?
The Madisonian checks and balances relies on the ambition of individuals in these institutions, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, to enjoy their power, to recognize that they have a role in the system, that their voice should be heard vis-a-vis the president. If partisanship wholly subsumes that and they abdicate that power, that responsibility, there will be literally no institutional checks and balances.
So is that a material risk here going forward over the next 4 years? How do you think about that? Because one could spin some crazy scenarios.
Yes. I mean, you could see an attempt to sort of unravel and undermine the sort of the institutional framework that we've been operating under for a long time. You could see that if there was coordination and agreement across all Trump cabinet people and Trump himself. But he is someone who is a little bit mercurial. He changes his mind a lot. And he's also, creating a team of rivals. I can't imagine that J.D. Vance is happy about either Marco Rubio or even Matt Gaetz being in the cabinet, right? These are competitors for 2028, theoretically. So there'll be competition and discord, as there always is. And Trump likes that. He foments that. He feeds off it. So
Right.
Do I think it will be systematic in what they can do? No. Do I think there'll be some chaos? Yes.
Professor Schiller, I got one more question. It's an audible. George Will, with a brilliant essay in the Washington Post, whether you agree or disagree with him doesn't matter. He pulls out the history of Wendy Schiller like no one. George Will goes where I was a couple days ago, Professor Schiller, saying, you know what, 2028 is before the census of 2030. His numbers, his guesstimates on where the electoral votes are in 2030 is still a massive shift to the South. It's just unbelievable how the electoral votes build in Florida, Arizona, et cetera, at the expense of New York, Illinois, and California. Are we going to see that radical of an electoral shift 6 years out?
You know, I think we've learned that elections in America are now very much about the candidates themselves. It's a choice between two alternatives. And we've seen an interesting candidate win now twice, who isn't typical. I don't know if we can make any assumptions about how people will vote until we know the choice set. But the idea that a Midwestern governor will be the choice and easily win, I think in 2032, I think you're pointing to a point that it's probably going to return to the South. But remember, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, quote unquote, saved the Democrats in 1992. So the Democrats themselves returned to the South to win the presidency not that long ago. So it won't be surprising if they have to do the same thing in 2032.
Wendy, I learned more from you in the last 4 minutes, 6 minutes, than all the hot air of the last 3 days on Senate confirmation. Just hugely valuable. Wendy Schiller, their definitive of Brown University and the Taubman Center as well. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by the American Arbitration Association. Business disputes, they are inevitable. Resolve faster with the American Arbitration Association, the global leader in alternative dispute resolution for over 90 years. More at adr.org. That's adr.org. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
Thank you, Tom. After returning to Florida after his trip to Washington yesterday, President-elect Donald Trump made an appearance at the America's First Policy Institute annual gala at the Mar-a-Lago Club, at his Mar-a-Lago Club last night.
They say most consequential win in the last 129 years. What's that all about? That's a lot. I just wanted to win. Didn't have to be that much. I just wanted to win. But we did. Yeah, too much winning. That was no such thing. Is there any such thing as too much winning?
Elon Musk accompanied the president-elect to the event where Trump boasted about his election victory. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tells Bloomberg that President-elect Trump's choices for his cabinet are good ones that send a message to the world.
For those world leaders, they have a relationship with President Trump, and I think they're probably thankful that President Trump won. It brings greater stability around the world, but it also sends a very clear message that America won't be pushed around. And also when it comes to economic issues like trade and others, this president wants to negotiate.
McCarthy added Trump's choice for Attorney General, Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, will not be confirmed. Gaetz' nomination may be overshadowing some of Trump's other cabinet picks. Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic Congresswoman from Hawaii turned Republican, is Trump's choice to be Director of National Intelligence. And Trump has confirmed that he is set to name Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Republicans have won enough seats to control the House now, completing the party's sweep into power and securing their hold on the government alongside President-elect Trump. With hard-fought yet thin majorities, Republican leaders are envisioning a mandate to upend the federal government and swiftly implement Trump's vision for the country. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Thanks so much, Amy. I greatly appreciate it. Paul, we're going to do this coming up here as well. Do you, from all your reading, see a recovery in office space?
I do
It's strange.
not. What I've heard from the experts, Tom, is if you're in an A building, high quality building, in a New York, in a Boston, in San Francisco, you're generally
It's
in
working.
good shape. If you're in anything other than that, then you're in a world of hurt. And so what I expect to see, what I'm looking to see, is some transactions in the marketplace, Tom. When you see a building on 3rd Avenue, for example, when that trades hands, what kind of discount is that going to be? And what does it mean for the lenders and the equity investors? We haven't seen too many transactions, so I'm not sure how bad it is out there.
I should say, as a disclaimer, folks, that Bloomberg LP is committed to 2 properties here in New York City in the recent weeks. That's in the news in New York City. So, Paul and I are looking to come into the same address we've always come to here in Lexington at 59th Street. But we've got an important conversation coming up on real estate. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Weekdays. 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific. 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific. 11 to 12 a.m. Mountain Time. 12 to 2 a.m. Pacific. 2 to 4 a.m. Pacific. 4 to 6 a.m. Eastern Time. 5 to 7 a.m. Mountain Time. 5 to 8 a.m. Eastern Time. 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. 11 to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. 12 to 2 a.m. Pacific. 2 to 4 a.m. Pacific. 4 to 6 a.m. Eastern Time. 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures mix, and this is after U.S. producer prices picked up in October. Weekly jobless claims, they fell about 4,000 to 217,000 last week. That was below estimates. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.1%, 24 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 48 points. S&P futures, little change, down about 4. We have the 2-year yield at 4.30%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's up 2 basis points. Bitcoin extended its rally before briefly topping 93,000. Now it's trimming its gains, but still up about 90,000. Shares of Disney checking in with their share up about 8%. We move over to Cisco Systems, better than expected quarterly results, upbeat outlook. But the thing is, a conservative annual forecast that didn't sit well with investors, so their shares are down 0.2%. ASML Holding higher, up 4%. Dutch maker Advanced Chip Making Machines reaffirmed its 2030 outlook. Big AI demand. And this story just coming in, Meta getting its first ever penalty for EU antitrust violations, hit with an $841 million fine for tying its Facebook marketplace service to its social network. Meta plans to appeal that decision. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
Is that like T-Pain, except it's EU pain?
EU pain.
Is it like
definitely
EU
pain at $841 million. Yes.
For those of you that missed it in the last hour, we were rapping, as they say, with Lisa Mateo over T-Pain. Tallahassee Pain. So, you're at Yale University. You got some cushy major going. You're having too much pizza.
Yeah.
And you get a real job, which makes you different as a portfolio manager. Folks, the Marine battle out of the trenches in CMBS trading, it's like the TV show industry. You're in London doing CMBS trading. It's just like the TV show industry. And, that's what happens. That's how you get to TCW.
Exactly. I mean, you start at Credit Suisse, which back in my day was Credit Suisse First Boston. Back
really?
In the day. Yes,
oh,
exactly.
My word.
Eliza Crawford joins us. She's a specialist portfolio manager in the fixed income group at TCW. TCW's out there in LA, folks. They are monster investment manager. They are buttoned up, Tom. They are like almost East Coast buttoned up for LA.
They look at debentures you can't pronounce.
I know, and they come in the office 5 days a week. That's why I like TCW. Liza, talk to us about commercial real estate. I make the mistake of just thinking commercial real estate is just office, but it's so much more than that. How do you guys look at commercial real estate?
We're active across sectors. So you're absolutely right. There are so many different property types, and they have different secular tailwinds and headwinds. So you mentioned office. Naturally, that has faced significant secular headwinds. You've seen areas like industrial that have benefited from secular tailwinds for the previous years. You have an area like retail that has already undergone a right sizing in the last 10 years. You have areas like hotel and hospitality that have really still benefited from the post-COVID travel surge. So we take advantage of the broader market.
What's Class B doing? Class A is clearly better. We got Louis Vuitton over here redoing their building. Prada just put in money. I mentioned the disclaimer. Michael Bloomberg is committed to 2 real estate properties for the company here on Park Avenue and over here on Lexington. Great. That's Class A. What's Class B doing here or in San Francisco?
Class B is hiding. So if we think about
what's that mean?
When
that's a Yale talk.
I know.
Nobody in real estate talks that way.
So borrowers that have taken out debt on their Class B properties are likely over-levered. The value of the asset is lower than the debt outstanding. They are most likely working with their lenders to extend and pretend. So because they can't sell the asset, because they cannot refinance the asset, they're doing a modification extension and hoping for some tenant demand increase in the coming years. And ultimately, the ones that are going to be successful in the Class B space will be razor sharp on figuring out what that tenant demand is and delivering the value that those tenants are looking for.
As an investor, do you believe there will be that rebound in demand for B and maybe even C properties out there?
The catch there, C, no, not necessarily. Okay. Those are under demolished. With respect to B, it really depends. If it's kind of the Class A that's been underinvested and that's fallen into B, then certainly there's a case to be made that if it upgrades its amenities, if it becomes more relevant, it can benefit from tenants that are looking for a lower price per square foot. But if it's B- that hasn't been invested in for decades, the sponsor's not willing to commit on tenant improvements, leasing costs, free rent, then it's tough to see it stabilizing anytime soon.
If I'm a real estate equity person and I see value in a building, let's call it a B-rated building on 3rd Avenue, and I say I get a deal, maybe I can buy it 60 cents on the dollar. Can I get debt financing for that? Will the local bank me, or what do I do there?
That's such a great point. So really the liquidity has not been there for a lot of office, and that has removed some of the flexibility in transactions and seeing new buyers come into the market. What you've seen is really unlevered buyers acquire assets, which is how you go from properties that had closer to $1,000 per square foot valuation sold below $200 per square foot valuation.
Dude.
Yeah.
Is the market clearing? And if it does, a trust company of the West, what's the x-axis look like for office buildings to clear in America? Is it a 3-year look? Is it a 7-year? What's that look like?
The market feels much healthier now for office from a bifurcation perspective, and you touched on that earlier. They're the trophy assets. Yes, we just saw a $3.5 billion single asset, single borrower CMBS deal price that was well oversubscribed.
Let's go back to that.
Yeah.
What was that deal again? Because I've heard that reference a few times that people are saying that's a good, reference point for the commercial real estate market. What transaction was that?
So that's Rockefeller Center. So you're looking at 13 properties, over 7 million square feet, mortgage debt only, no mezzanine debt, and a lower cost per square foot on the valuation, sub 1,000 per square foot, and a lower leverage point on the debt, sub $500 per
What's
square
the
foot.
IRR in that? Can you give us off of cap rate? Can you give us a return on that for? Is it 5% or is it
For
less?
the sponsor, they're longer term holds, so I'm not quite sure what their IRR is, but from the capital structure perspective, it did help reprice the market. We initially were looking at the subs, so the first loss in the 580s, and now those are inside of, or those are in the 400s.
Should Paul wants to know, should he refi here? I mean, I'm sure you get this at every beverage of your choice. Is a 30-year mortgage, you step into the real estate market now?
On the residential side, refinancing here, from our perspective, there's more room to run with Fed cuts, and there can be a better point to refinance. But certainly, if you can save money, go ahead and refinance. There are a lot of borrowers that are still in lower, kind of 4% and below.
Why is everyone leaving California, but real estate in California is mental stupid expensive?
Yeah, we definitely saw people leave to take advantage of tax savings in other states. I do think that the tide is turning, though. Some of those individuals are coming back, and what I hear from others is that Californians that moved out of the state have just increased the housing prices elsewhere. So I think they welcome the return of Californians to California. The values are very high for pricing.
Private credit,
houses.
Is that big in your market?
Yes. So we're really grateful for private credit. I feel like it made securitized cool again. So the securitized market is about $13 trillion, and we really focus on the more liquid side for a lot of our clients. And private credit really delivers that illiquid solution, that illiquid capital to the broader securitized structured finance market. There's already been a lot of activity, but to have it in a more pronounced way with more fundraising around it makes it even more fun to be in our position, finding great opportunities for our clients.
Were you in the TCW seats at the World Series?
No, I missed that invite. It must have gotten lost. I was
it's
not.
very, very cool. I mean, think about it. It sort of like drifted away with the election and all that. But did you go to the parade?
Didn't go to the parade. Yeah, I was at my grandmother's 95th birthday party. So
very cool.
Very good for grandma. Excellent.
Did you bore her to death with real estate talk, right?
She loves hearing about the office sector. She loves, I've done some mall property shows around her.
How did you get from Yale International Studies to the nerddom of CMBS?
Yeah, so
this is Fabozzi's fault?
This is a great question. I had 17 first-round interviews between finance and consulting, thanks to Yale's great recruiting program.
Right.
And finance is the most exciting, and then fixed income. We were talking about fixed income and equities. I think fixed income's a little nerdier, but really fun. And structured finance is the best of all the sectors.
Are there really? You talk about finance. Are there really guys out there 6'5" trust fund finance? Are they really out there?
There are some. But
Selected.
I wouldn't recommend anyone kind of manifest trying to marry
Thank
them.
you. This has been great. Lisa, don't be. Are you based here or in LA?
I'm based in LA. Happy to come to New York City anytime.
Okay,
Anytime
Leslie
you're here,
Crawford,
let us
thank
know.
you so much. Trust Company of the West, TCW. We're in Boston tomorrow, which means you've got to go back to Watertown, Massachusetts. Foxglove Studio, Tom.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo. Michael Barr on assignment. Lisa Mateo is in the house after a spirited newspaper article idea. We say good morning. It's an hour here. I'm going to be leaving a little bit early in this hour to jet. Paul has a golf stream,
Sure.
so I've got to go out to LaGuardia. LaGuardia highly rated now after their
I know.
construction.
It's outstanding.
And
Good for
Newark
them.
is next, I guess.
Terminal A
You
is
know.
a thing of beauty. They did a great job there.
It's gonna be great. I was just working tomorrow. We're in Boston. Good morning, 92.9 FM Boston. We'll be at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston tomorrow. Michael McKee talking with Susan Collins. And Paul, I was going to go to Lockober's for dinner.
Yep.
But that's the way I roll. Except It's now Yvonne's.
Yvonne's?
Yvonne's.
Well, sounds a little
I
fishy.
think I'm going to try and slip in tonight. See if I can go with Eric. And sit at the bar.
Sit
I
at
don't
the
think
bar,
we,
get a
we-
cocktail.
we can't get like a dinner because it's packed, but
Okay.
Yvonne's.
Okay.
They don't have the little silver things with a trolley where the silver comes up like it's 1920. And,
Yeah, that's what you like.
and also the naked woman that my grandmother used to hide from my eyes in the main room. That
Back
was
in the day.
Lockover of another time and place. We'll be in Boston tomorrow. Good morning. Yvonne's up in Boston. Speaking of Boston, the oldest bank in America, BNY, Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by BNY. The NY is for New York. Did you know that? BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit bny.com. We thank the support of BNY. Our guest is too important, right to an interactive broker studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures mix. New data showed U.S. producer prices picked up last month. Tomorrow we have a read on retail sales, manufacturing import prices, and also industrial production. So NASDAQ futures down about 0.1%, 33 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 69 points. S&P futures little change, down about 3 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.27%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that is little change. To currencies, we have the dollar stronger. Japanese yen at 155.91 against a dollar. We have the euro at 105.36 against a dollar. British pound weaker. Bitcoin up about 2%, like we said, about 90,000. Coinbase Global up 2%. We have MicroStrategy up 3%. Those are those crypto-related stocks. And then we go over to earnings. We have Walt Disney right now. They're up about 8%. Film
Wow.
studio streaming business drove that earnings growth. Advanced Auto Parts down 0.5%. Posted net sales for the quarter missed estimate. It also plans to shut down about 500 stores. And after the close, we move on to Applied Materials. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Ed Yardeni with us early in the hour. We go stronger now in equities. Gina Martin Adams with us. Yardeni hangs on her every word. What does your team of like 200 slaves, what do they say about earnings, margins post-election?
Yeah. It's a really tricky situation. I think first you need to reflect on what happened in the first Trump administration with tariffs. Analysts overreacted to the potential impact of tariffs by dropping margin forecasts materially. So they're going to be more cautious this time around with respect to margin forecasts. They'll wait and see. And I think this is an important difference between 2018 and what we're likely to experience in 2025. Analysts, of course, think tariffs will be bad. Right? And in 2018, they thought tariffs would be bad. So they dramatically marked down margin forecasts. The margin reality turned out to be quite a bit less bad than they were anticipating. So they learned from that experience, and now they're thinking into 2025. Let's wait and see what really happens. Let's wait and see where the tariffs are likely to be implemented, because clearly what the Trump rhetoric on the campaign trail would be very, very negative for margins going forward. But will these tariffs actually be implemented? Will we see an across-the-board 10 to 20% tariff plus a 60% tariff on China? Because that's materially more impactful than the last time around. But the analyst community is still very cautious on how much they want to actually put this into their estimates. Because, frankly, we still haven't even had an inauguration.
Right.
And we don't really know what the implementation of this plan is going to look like.
And stocks have rallied, over the last since the election. What does that tell you? Just maybe taking away uncertainty and unknown.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because what we do know is that this president is very committed to reducing taxes for corporates, right? And so there is some understanding that there will be tax reform. We know that the implementation of tax reform was very bullish for stocks in the early part of the first Trump administration. So that is increasingly getting priced while we're still waiting on what will tariffs do to diminish that positive impact of tax.
My whole act is corporations will adjust. Mm-hmm. They will adapt.
Yes.
How will they adjust? Do they delay capital spending? Do they increase it and saying this is as good as it gets? How will they adapt?
I think it depends upon what tariffs are implemented first, but the core case is they adapt by first attempting price increases, right? They first attempt to pass on the price increase to the final consumer. We do see that as most likely. Then they start to cut their own costs to mitigate the price increases as they're trying to game out how much price increase they can pass on to the consumer. They migrate some production, shut down their highest cost production facilities in the highest tariff areas of the world, start to escalate production in facilities that are not tariffed. So they game it out altogether.
I got to interrupt because you're expert at this. The media is always in a bilateral discussion, U.S.-China. I'm like, wait a minute. Vietnam, Singapore, it's multilateral, right?
It's absolutely multilateral. Companies have operations across the world. Most of these multinational organizations that are going to be impacted by this, let's say you have an auto plant, a portion of your auto production facilities are located in Canada and Mexico. There is some implemented tariff to try to prevent imports of auto parts or autos from Canada and Mexico into the United States and force manufacture inside the United States. You just toggle production out of those facilities and move it to production in other facilities.
This is William Klein 101 at the Peterson Institute. Gina, can we have a moment of silence? Lisa, for Paul Sweeney. Sweeney nailed the Disney recovery, up 9%. Every time we talked about it, Tom, shut up. They've got a portfolio of assets. Sweeney nailed Disney long here.
It's tough to bet against Mickey Mouse, I always feel like.
There you go.
Exactly. Gina, you guys have in a recent research note I guess the equity risk premium is at a 22-year low.
Yes.
What is the equity risk premium?
Thank you, Paul.
And why do we
I got
think
that
about
wrong in the CFA.
Yeah. It's a great question. A little bit esoteric, but nonetheless, what we're doing with this is we're taking the earnings yield on
Bloomberg
stocks.
Surveillance,
I'm
not
shocked.
esoteric. I'm shocked.
We're taking the earnings yield on stocks and comparing it to the yield that you can get in subsequent bonds, right?
Okay.
So you can get it on the either 10-year Treasury or the corporate credit market, whatever your favored yield is. In that particular stat, we're comparing to the 10-year Treasury yield, and we're saying, look, the amount of yield you can get out of the equity market right now relative to the yield that you can get just by buying a government bond is at 22-year lows. Now, you have to caveat all of this because that may or may not be important. It has been a lot lower, and it's stayed a lot lower than that throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The key difference between today's period and the 1980s and 1990s is we're not sitting at high levels of interest rates, high levels of inflation that are going to go through a secular downdraft for the next
but the
30
bottom
years,
line is
right?
when you're doing a Newtonian plug and chug on that core equation, you got to put in share buybacks and use of cash.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic core equation avoids the modern use of cash.
I think you're absolutely right, because all we're doing is looking at an earnings yield. And of course, that is at core how most people look at the value of the equity market. We're not looking at a total return. We're not looking at dividend yield plus share buyback yield. So we're missing some key components.
One more question. Amy Morris is loving the Boston music today. We got to get to her. But Gina Martin Adams, how do you respond to the uproar over Ed Yardeni's bullishness? And yet, when you model it out, it's just a 7% vector.
I noticed. I noticed that myself.
Yeah. How do you respond to that as a pro?
These big round numbers draw a lot of attention. You got to pay attention to the details. What is his average annualized pace of growth in the S&P 500? Mid-single-digit returns.
So
that's actually below the average annual return to the S&P of the last decade.
So when you work for Sweeney, did he ever send the report back to you and say the headline's not sexy enough?
Always. Paul is just a tyrant when it comes to that stuff.
Gina Martin Adams, brilliant. Thank you so much. That's what the show's about, folks. If Yardeni and Martin Adams with us here in one day is just absolutely superb. She loves Boston. She loves the cars. I had no idea someone that looks at South Carolina sports would, With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
All right, Tom, thank you. It's a whole Gen X thing. We'll talk about that later. First, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says most of Donald Trump's nominations are so far good ones, except for one.
Gates won't get confirmed. Everybody knows that. Gates couldn't win in a Republican column, so it doesn't matter.
McCarthy says Trump's other nominations will send a clear message to the world that America won't be pushed around. Gates has resigned from the House just after Donald Trump tapped him to serve as Attorney General, and as the House Ethics Panel was set to vote to release a report that was critical of him. The committee has been investigating allegations that the Florida Republican engaged in sexual misconduct and illicit drug use. Multiple news outlets report lawmakers were ready to vote on releasing that report to the public tomorrow. Gates' resignation effectively ends the investigation. Former Secretary of State John Kerry says the incoming Trump administration can take advantage of work that the Biden administration did regarding the conflict in the Middle East. He tells Bloomberg that a lot of the work was being done to bring Saudi Arabia to the table to recognize Israel.
It depends hugely, if not entirely, on how you approach the question of Gaza, how you begin to deal with the Palestinian future, and there's a lot to nibble on. But it is a table that has been set for negotiation.
Former Secretary of State John Kerry on the sidelines of the Barclays Asia Forum in Singapore. More than 1 million migrants are living and working legally in the U.S. under temporary protected status. They're from 17 countries the U.S. has deemed unsafe. President-elect Donald Trump and running mate J.D. Vance have suggested they'll scale back the use of TPS under their new administration. Advocates say that's increasing some anxiety for those who've been shielded from deportation. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Amy, I'm looking. Amy, thanks so much. Paul, I'm looking here, and Lisa, I'm looking at Yvonne's menu. I mean, if I go in for the Tunisian chicken and undersell Red Oak Keeper of the Amex, $21. That prime rib chop, $155.
No problem. Jeez,
that's
where are they
Boston
getting this?
cash. That's
is
Boston
brutal,
money.
Brutal. Yeah, you're gonna have to go talk to Reddit before you get
The
on the plane. I think.
Zatar rack of lamb, $125.
Is this for like multiple people?
I think it's for multiple people.
That's what
but
Yvonne's does. I think
Eric
like
alone can
party.
eat the whole darn thing. I don't.
Eric's got it all. Okay.
This is not lockovers. This is like charred maitake mushroom.
Yeah.
It's a mushroom on a plate, $19. Lisa, help me here. Is this appropriate?
No, that's way too much. Are you kidding me?
I'll go to Durgan Park. That'll be better. So, carrot cake, $12.
Oh.
See, in New York, that would be $18.
Yep, exactly.
So they're doing it good. I think Yvonne's tonight. I mean,
All right, very
maybe
good.
let me sit at the bar. We'll
Yep, get a
have
cocktail.
to see.
figure
We're
it
in
out.
Boston tomorrow, the Boston Fed. Susan Collins, really interesting Fed president, in conversation with Michael McKee. We'll have a lot of other good people with us as well in support of 92.9 FM Boston. But for all of you on your national commute on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, 99.1, I should say, in Washington, the land of Amy Morris, Bloomberg 1130 in New York, and of course, out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, please. Thrilled at the growth that we're seeing on YouTube. From New York City, retail sales tomorrow, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got futures mix. This is after new data showed U.S. producer prices picked up in October. Traders now await a speech from Chair Jay Powell later this afternoon. So we have NASDAQ futures down just about 0.1%, 20 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 100 points. We have S&P futures are little changed. We have the 2-year yield, 4.27%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.43%. And that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 1%, $73 a barrel. WTI crude, $69 a barrel. We have spot gold lower, $2,559 an ounce. Quick check of Disney shares. They're up about 9%. And then a few companies making news. It's Ben & Jerry's suing its parent company Unilever for silencing it on advocating for Palestinian rights. And finally, Nippon Steel's vice president set to meet with steel workers representing the unions that run United States Steel Corp's plants in Pittsburgh. That'll take place next week. And just a quick shout out to Kevin Gordon, our friend from Charles Schwab, who comes to visit all the time. Out on Twitter, he says we need a rebranding from T-Pain, who we were talking about earlier, to T-Kane. So he likes
nice.
that. I
All
like
right,
it.
I like that.
Not too bad. Kevin Gordon, thank you. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa, thanks so much. Without further ado, joining us now, Dee Ives with Wedbush. He's got this new fancy title, Global Head Technology Research Analyst. What'd you do? Walk into the room with a white shirt on and say, I've changed? How did you get this promotion?
I know. I was basically, I threatened, I might try to do the key and wear a bow tie. And they're like, look, you know what? You cannot do that.
Can't
you
do
need
the
the
branding and
there's only
all
one
that.
legend. It's Keene.
Okay, Paul wants to get to Elon. I got to ask one question. There's all this nerddom out, which I don't understand, about the new Mac Mini, Mac Pro, Mac Max. My head is spinning. Can computers move the needle for Apple, or is it just iPhones?
Look, I think it's all part of the ecosystem, but when you look at what we're seeing on the Mac side, just like what we're going to see on iPad and ultimately on some of the other pieces, they actually do start to move the needle because we are in a replacement cycle. But the crux continues to be, as we talk about, we are in what's going to be a 12 to 18 month iPhone cycle that will continue to beat the street every quarter. And that's why I believe this is a stock we sit here and it'll have a 3 in front of it.
Elon doesn't care, Paul.
Speaking of Elon, Tom, I got to go to you, Dan. Since the last time we spoke to you, we had a little bit of an election here in the U.S. Elon Musk has taken such a high-level position within the Trump orbit. As an analyst covering Elon and Tesla for such a long time, what does that mean for the stock of Tesla?
It's a game changer. I mean, like we talked before going into the election, Musk has and is going to have a huge seat at the table in a Trump administration. And I'm not just talking about the Doge and in terms of what ultimately could come from behind. I think this is a game changer because when you look at autonomous and AI and really the regulatory spider web that's really, I believe, locked some of that potential, there's $1 trillion of value alone just on AI and autonomous. And when we start to look out over the next 12, 18, 24 months, I do not believe that $2 trillion is ridiculous. I think to some extent it could be conservative. This is a poker move for the ages that Musk made on Trump. And now him and Tesla are going to just be significant beneficiaries.
When you talk to investors of Tesla, are they concerned about, again, we've talked about this over and over again, about him spreading himself too thin. He seems to be able to keep all the balls in the air, and he's done that during his entire career. Here's another big ball in the air.
Sure.
Is this too much, maybe?
I think when it goes back to even all the Twitter acts and the worries about, taking the eye off the ball, clearly that did not happen. So there's more comfort there in terms of... Now, when it comes to on the government side, you want him more involved. The more involved he is better for it's better for big tech. Because ultimately, when you say it's like Apple and it's unrelated, it actually is related because when it comes to China tariffs, guess who's going to have a big seat at the table? It's going to be Musk. Because you will have, I truly believe, carve-outs when it comes to Tesla, Apple, and some of the supply chain in terms of NVIDIA.
A lot of political pundits, both sides of the fence, don't agree with you. This is a guy who did Twitter, he did PayPal. I get all the technology Dan Ives chit-chat. Can he work in a political maelstrom like international relations between Washington and Beijing?
Yeah, it's good. Look, I think like him and Cook are probably the only two that have been able to navigate the China tightrope political in
Fair.
Beijing. So there's no one that understands the China dynamics and also has a very good relationship with the President Xi in terms of Musk. And that's why when you look at this is, I think, look, it's going to be a golden era in terms of tech, golden era for Tesla, for Musk. And that's why with Trump getting it changes everything because look, the FTC is going to be done, consensus view in terms of the street perspective. M&A is going to significantly accelerate. And that's why I think it's a champagne moment. It continues to be 10 p.m. in the AI party that goes to 4 a.m. So
for EVs in general, what's your latest thinking on just kind of where demand is there for EVs? It seems like we've hit a bump in the road here. How do you think about that?
Yeah, we've definitely hit a bump in the road, but I'd actually say we're starting to actually trough out and you're starting to see growth specifically, not just in the U.S., but especially China. I mean, Tesla just had their strongest China quarter ever. But the big thing here, Paul, is that the EV tax credits, one of the first things that Trump's going to do is going to rip them. They're going to pull them, the tax credits.
But don't the tax credits spur demand?
So that's a negative for the EV industry, a negative for GM, Ford, Detroit, 313
Is it a
area
negative
code.
for Musk?
But it's a bullish for Musk and Tesla because
Why?
they have the scale and scope where it's unmatched. So they can make money on a $35,000 vehicle. The others can't. You pull those, gives them just that much more of a flex the muscles moment.
How do you respond to just general China gloom? OMG, China's never coming back, whatever. How do you respond to that?
It's the same bears that sit in hibernation mode in their spreadsheets and been negative on every transformational tech name the last 15 years. To me, it's like betting that China's out is the wrong game. I mean, because you will have stimulus. Beijing knows in ways that they're going to pull the levers. We've been there, many times over the last year, and I think you're starting to see sentiment improve. And look, then also you look at numbers. Look at Tesla's China numbers. Look at what I believe is going to be Apple iPhone numbers. I'm not saying it's rose and champagne, but on some pieces, the negative doom and gloom has gotten way too, I think, overstretched.
Why are you going to West Lafayette, Indiana this weekend?
Where's he going?
West
What's
Lafayette,
there?
Purdue University.
I didn't know that.
The Boilermakers.
Really?
A great school. Unfortunately, Penn State. I'll be there with the team going there. To go 1-0
With
again.
Penn State.
I'll be a guest coach.
Guest coach.
Guest coach.
What in God's name is a guest coach?
Look, it's not just tech that that's my expertise. But obviously, as a huge Penn State football fan and very close to the program, I'll be with the team as we go from State College to West Lafayette.
So they picked for you a barn burner. Isn't Purdue like the worst football team in America?
Look, again, Purdue.
1-8.
But again, in the Big Ten, in my opinion, I think it's shown in these college rankings. Right. Best conference in the country, better than SEC.
Yeah,
Look, 4 of the top 5 are Big Ten.
Is Indiana for real?
Oh, I think Signetti's the GOAT. I think Indiana's for real, and I think, but at the end of the day, at the top of this mountain, it's going to be Penn State.
I need some help. Okay, I'm not. Sweeney won't talk to me about this. The Penn State coach just can't get it done. What's he going to do inside the 10-yard line with Coach Ives on the sideline?
Oh, I mean, I think Franklin's one of the best coaches in America, and that's why I disagree with many of the skeptics. I disagree with many of the skeptics. Look at what we've done and what I believe what we are going to do against some of the best teams. And in the playoffs, let's talk in late December, after we're going to the quarters and the semis.
Yeah, look, his apple's going to 180. I got the same look for Dan.
Betting against Penn State, it's like betting against Apple and Tesla.
Thank you for wearing a more subdued shirt today. Still on radio, you're a value add. You don't have to look at Ives. Sure. Dan Ives with some new title I can't get in here in 14 seconds with Wedbush. And with Penn State this weekend, boiler up. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 14.05. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this opening bell report brought to you by JP Morgan Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest growing investment vehicle with the new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETF insights to learn more. All right, so we've had some more economic data out for today. Producer prices picked up last month. Weekly jobless claims fell 4,000 to 217,000 last week. That was below estimates. So let's get to the market reaction as we get things started. The S&P 500 up 0.1%, 6 points at 5,992. The Dow up 0.2%, 89 points, 44,038. The Nasdaq up 0.1%, 26 points at 19,256. My goodness.
I'm laughing so hard. I'm not sure I can get through the next 15 minutes.
It's okay. We have the 2-year yield, 4.25%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.42%, and that's down 3 basis points. We'll take you over to commodities. We have Brent crude, $73 a barrel. WTI crude, $69 a barrel. Have to go over to Bitcoin right now, up at around 91,000 at the open. We're checking in with Disney, and those shares, they are up about 9%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report.
Thanks so much, folks. When we designed the program, and this goes way back, it goes back to the great Ken Pruitt and Pim Fox, David Gurr, and all that. Mike McKee with me years ago. The cardinal rule, and you don't see this, is we have fun. And, it's something like Lisa's miserable because her son won't get out of bed, or, Paul, there's a cloud over Paul's hot beach house, whatever, the worries of the day. We're just trying to get through this, and sometimes it gets so funny, I can't even move forward. And after Dan Ives in Penn State, I love this out on YouTube. Thank you for subscribing out on YouTube. And I just can't say enough about the live chat. Where is it here? best bet in college football is going against Penn State when they play a top 5 team.
That's
Discuss.
absolutely right. 1 in 14. Rich may correct me here, but I think 1 in 14 against top 5 teams is Coach Franklin. That said, no one is calling for any changes, I think, of materiality at Penn State.
And like
Coach
Georgia
Franklin.
faded in the last couple weeks, right? Like
Yeah.
Georgia's had a tough time.
It's all over the place. It's
It's
wide
all over
open
the
out there.
place.
It's wide open out there.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that comment, Odin.
And we'll talk Harvard
YouTube.
football tomorrow, probably.
Rocking it, 6-1 or 7-1, and they
Sure.
beat Dartmouth, and then they beat a tough Columbia.
They're setting up for the game
It's
against
exciting.
Yale.
It was great to see Coach Oric. He's sitting there after the game with his cherub in his arms.
Yep.
Talking about the game. I mean, it's like it's like football we remember, not
Right.
this professional stuff we're seeing. Now, let's talk about a market that we remember when you have a sweep. The trifecta is the word the media is using.
Yes.
For what we see in Washington. Brent Schutte, CIO at Northwestern. Brent, you're going to bore me to death and say don't change anything because short term at Northwestern Mutual is at least 5 years, which gets you on to the next election. Baloney. How do you adapt and amend after the election?
So I think you always have to take into consideration where you are in the business cycle because that is larger than any one president, and they always have a limited time horizon. And I think people overweight politics too much in their decision framework. Let me give you one example. The best performing sector during President Biden's time in office, energy. The worst performing sector during President Trump's time in office, the first time, energy. That doesn't seemingly make sense, but that's what's happened because we had COVID in between. And so to me, the business cycle is incredibly important. That's where the president is taking office. Look, as we saw again this morning, inflation is still high and appears to be stuck. The unemployment rate has risen, but we still don't have a ton of labor market slack, which means wages are elevated and are not faltering, and market valuations are incredibly expensive, especially in larger cap stocks. And so to me, we will make tweaks, but certainly throwing everything away because one administration takes office versus the other, at least historically, has proven to be the wrong thing to do.
Speak, and I'm honored to say this to Brent Schutte. He's been participating, and that's the hardest thing to do. Speak to people. They're not like pros. They're just scared stiff. They're in cash or 2-year Paul Sweeney paper. Speak to people scared stiff to participate. How do they get into the market?
Well, I think you need to have an asset allocation that matches your overall goals and objectives, which I know sounds boring, but it's true. Look, you're not buying stocks today that it matters what happens tomorrow. You're buying stocks today for what matters what happens 8, 9, 10 years in the future. If you need something in the near term, own fixed income. It actually yields something right now and is cheap relative to our stocks. And so I think that's the most important thing that we do at Northwestern Mutual. We have advisors who help match our clients' goals with a portfolio that meets those. And so that's where I think it's most important. To me, there are tons of opportunities in the market. We continue to like small and mid-cap stocks. That's where I think there's opportunities for people who are willing to look past the next 2-3 months and think about the next 2 or 3 years, which I think is the easiest way, or the best way, I shouldn't say easiest, the best way to make money rather than trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next week or two.
Markets open. Paul, the VIX, 13.82.
Yep.
Weren't we at 22 like 3 cups of Sanka ago?
Exactly. You're exactly right. So the risk has come out of the market here now that we have some resolution, if nothing else, on the election front. Brent, are there sectors here that maybe you guys changed your outlook Wednesday morning on certain sectors out there in the marketplace?
No, I mean, I think, one easy way to think about it is we do like the S&P equal weight more than the S&P market weight. Look, we have an economy that is out of equilibrium. You have parts of the economy that have benefited actually from higher rates versus parts that have not. Think about consumers and corporations. From a market perspective, I just mentioned you have large trading at premiums that it's only traded versus small one other time, which is 1999. And that ended up being a good time to buy small. From the standpoint of large versus, stocks versus bonds, I know that you've been reporting this on Bloomberg quite a bit. The earnings yield of the S&P 500 is below that of the 10-year Treasury. And so to me, there are opportunities for investors looking forward. I think it's small, it's mid-cap, it's equal-weighted S&P. It's some of the sectors that haven't done as well as some of the other sectors that have kind of carried the weight for the past year and a half without much of the market actually participating.
And now we go, folks, where the general counsel of Northwestern Mutual does not want to go. We do this with Brent Schutte, CIO, Northwestern Mutual. There's a series of firms, Brent, who have flat out said, we're not doing Bitcoin. Amend what Northwestern Mutual is doing for their investors with Bitcoin after the 6-month extravaganza that we've seen.
So we do not have Bitcoin in our advisory programs, but certainly it can be purchased unsolicited. And so to me, overall, I mean, Bitcoin right now, I still don't know what moves it. It's certainly up and to the right. I'm not for sure what the use case is yet. It doesn't mean that it's a forever commentary. It's just a highly volatile asset that can rise and fall spectacularly. And that's a hard thing for investors to stay with, especially when it falls on the opposite side, which at least historically it has. I suppose we'll see what it becomes going forward. It's an interesting time period for sure. But it's not a forever commentary that we're going to bury our heads in the sand. But certainly we want to make sure when we're thinking about clients that we know what moves it, we know what causes it to go up, and we know what causes it to falter so that we can think about an overall portfolio.
But you're not participating. How do you treat Bitcoin ETFs at Northwestern Mutual?
They are available to be purchased unsolicited. They're not in our advisory programs right now.
Okay. I think this is important. I mean, there's
not everybody's.
They're not the only ones.
No.
There's people out there just
Absolutely.
saying, we're not going to participate.
JP Morgan. I mean, Jamie Dimon. Brent, since over the last week here, all the focus has been on the U.S. and our elections and our market reaction. How about outside of the U.S., international, either developed markets, emerging markets? What do you guys at Northwestern Mutual think about international?
So we remain diversified. Certainly we have more of a U.S. focus right now, like many people do. I think the question is what happens with tariffs if they get passed. And this is where I think the economic cycle, which I mentioned before, is incredibly important to think about because that does have an impact on what can actually happen. If you think about the last few weeks, the Fed has actually cut rates by 75 basis points, which is the hope that the Fed can cut rates and that will alleviate the pains on the parts of the economy that have done not so well the last year or year and a half because they're impacted by higher rates. And the 10-year Treasury is actually 85 basis points higher. And so I think everyone needs to keep in mind that bigger, broader economic cycle when they're looking out and thinking about what may become in the next year or 2 years, because that's where I think some of the administration's hopes and wishes may have to be pulled back just a bit. And you mentioned, I think earlier, that we have a Republican sweep, but it's a very narrow sweep. And so to me, just staying diversified, staying overall invested in those markets, which are cheaper, certainly they're impacted by tariffs. I think people know that. This time that's probably priced a bit more. But that's where I think there are still opportunities in some of those economies, in some of those markets for people to participate, even if tariffs do occur.
Brent, thank you so much, particularly the comments there on Bitcoin. Brent Schutte, CIO at Northwestern Mutual. Red and green on the screen, a VIX again under 14, 13.94. 10-year real yield, 2.05%, comes in a little bit this morning, at least for now. American oil, West Texas Intermediate, $69 the barrel. With our news in Washington, Amy Morris.
All right. Thank you, Tom. President-elect Donald Trump could have a much easier time enacting his agenda. Republicans are maintaining their hold on the House majority. GOP securing the 218th seat it needed with a win in Arizona. 9 more House races still have to be decided, but it won't be enough for Democrats to take over the chamber. Trump has yet to pick a nominee for Treasury Secretary. The Wall Street Journal reports Howard Lutnick wants the job. The paper says the Cantor Fitzgerald CEO has gone directly to Trump about the position. Lutnick was the co-chair of Trump's transition team. Now, earlier this week, Trump tapped Elon Musk to help head a new project to clear away government inefficiencies. Critics say it is a conflict to have Musk, who runs 6 companies, to be involved in that administration. Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy doesn't agree with that.
Elon doesn't benefit from government. America has benefited from Elon. And for Elon to sacrifice his time away from business because he cares about a country that opened up those arms that he immigrated to that we are so proud of. People who benefit is Americans from Elon. It's not the other way around.
Kevin McCarthy made those comments in an interview with Bloomberg at the Barclays Asia Forum in Singapore. Israel's special envoy for climate change and sustainability says he hopes Trump's second term in office will lead to more cooperation on climate issues. Bloomberg's Jemana Versace sat down with Ambassador Gideon Behar.
There are so many challenges in the region that deserve handling them together, like water scarcity, like food security, and more. And we hope really that with Trump, we will be able to move into more closer cooperation in the region.
Israel's special envoy, Ambassador Gideon Behar, speaking with Bloomberg at the Climate Change Summit in Azerbaijan. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. Appreciate that. A little bit of weight to the tape. Retail sales tomorrow. What do you think, Paul, on retail sales? To me, there's still two Americas, and it's a hugely bifurcated picture.
I think you're absolutely right, Tom. I think the folks that, own real assets, whether it's stocks, bonds, real estate, they're doing fine because the value of those assets have appreciated pretty dramatically over the last several years. The folks that do not have access to those investment in those assets, those are the ones I think feel the sting of inflation much more acutely. And boy, it's been tough on their pocketbooks. Retail sales tomorrow, looking for a 0.3% increase in retail sales month to month here. A little bit slower than last month, but still pretty solid.
You're going to have to see. Here's a headline just out, Rich. Thank you for this. I appreciate it. U.S. money market fund assets surpass $7 trillion. I mean, to Larry McDonald's fabulous essay of 2 years ago now, I emailed him the other day. He doesn't look at my emails.
No?
He ignores me.
Okay.
But I said to Larry, I said, redo your piece on the wall of money that's out there. It's like Mr. Buffett. He's got, he's like,
I know. Warren Buffett, what do you do with all that cash? Yeah, exactly. So
Lisa Mateo's huge in cash.
She's part of that $7 trillion.
$7 trillion.
Yep.
You go to the BTMM screen on the Bloomberg, folks. This is Sweeney taught me this. You go to the BTMM screen. You can look at deposit rates, and that deposit rates have come down a little bit, but money market funds, are they still popping 5, Paul?
You get here on a 4-week, just a 4-week U.S. T-bill, 4.56%. What's wrong with that? I mean, the government's going to pay me back in 4 weeks.
It's in a little bit, but $7 trillion.
Exactly.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Barry Ritholtz says, don't worry about cash on the sidelines. It'll get deployed. But I don't know. I mean,
is Barry boycotting us?
No, we get him in Bloomberg.
You get him at 10?
Yeah, we get him at
he doesn't get
Thursdays.
That early.
No, of course not.
Understand. Down -42. Stay with us from New York City. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. And we say good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, just struggling to make some headway. This is after weekly jobless claims came in lower for the fourth time in 5 weeks. 217,000 applications were filed last week. That's the lowest reading since May. The total number of American workers collecting unemployment, that is also down. So we head to the NASDAQ, down about 0.2%, 55 points. The Dow, little change, down about 18 points. The S&P 500, down about 0.1% or 9 points. We have the two-year yield at 4.26%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.42%, and that's down 3 basis points. We have shares of Cisco Systems. They're down nearly 2%. It gave a lukewarm annual forecast. Even as quarterly results, they did beat. Tapestry, planning to buy back $6.1 billion of bonds it sold to fund its now blocked purchase of Capri. That's after abandoning the deal due to antitrust pressure. Right now we have Capri down about 3%, and we have Tapestry up about 10%. And finally, checking in with shares of Disney, they are up 10%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Tom just stepped out. He's heading up. He's getting the early plane up to Boston. He's got a lot of people up there, Lisa, that I think he needs to go talk to. He's a player up there in Boston.
He's got to get the dinners ready.
He's got to get he's been arranging a whole evening worth of stuff up there in Boston. We're going to get retail sales tomorrow. We'll get a good sense of how the consumer is doing with the retail sales numbers. I also like to talk to analysts that cover, stuff that the consumers interact with. Think about, lodging, gaming, restaurants, where consumers actually spend money out there. And our next guest can help us do that. Jody Lurie, she's a credit analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, and she covers all those consumer-facing industries. Jody, let's first talk about just kind of what you're seeing from your companies. What are your companies, again, the lodging companies, the cruise lines, the rental car companies, what are they saying about the consumer out there?
So that's a loaded question, Paul, and certainly does change a little bit potentially after the election, although stay tuned for that. I think the problem that we're dealing with right now is lower income consumers are pulling back, and we are seeing that in the data. We're seeing that in quick service restaurants. We're seeing that in casual dining. We're seeing that in certain pockets of the consumer spending in leisure. And by that I mean is that companies that target higher income consumers are still doing very well, but they are cautioning that there could be some moderation next year because leisure in general is pulling back because people might not be spending on experiences as much.
And Hertz just reported yesterday, and it's a company you look at, and what did you hear from Hertz yesterday?
We've been a little bit more negative on Hertz of late. We sort of anticipated coming into 2023 and 24 that the good times of 22 were going to be over. That eventually the company would sort of shift back from that robust EBITDA that it was reporting. Same thing with Avis. Now, of course, Hertz had the misstep of the Teslas, in terms of buying all those EVs and not recognizing that people aren't comfortable taking EVs for a spin when they're in Montana, right? Yep. You're going to a national park. I don't know where the charging station is. I'm not going to sit there for a few hours and charge my car. So they had to backpedal. They've changed CEOs multiple times. The results were slightly better than what I anticipated from the standpoint that it wasn't as ugly, but it doesn't mean that there isn't very, very slim margin right now till they get back to potentially cash flow break even.
I know you're out in Vegas recently for the Global Gaming Expo. How are our friends in Vegas doing?
Our friends in Vegas. So the larger companies, larger operators, seem to be doing pretty healthy. And even if the consumer does, in fact, pull back, even if we aren't having as much experience spending, as we saw with the Sphere, the Sphere was a little bit more disappointing this quarter.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was. I mean, on a relative basis, we saw these large numbers the first few quarters. And even though we had the Eagles, even though you had the UFC, you had these large scale events, even so, this quarter was a little bit disappointing. Okay. And I think it goes back to the fact that even if you look at the F1, and this was again anecdotal, although I did ask some of companies' management teams about this. For the F1 this year, they more quickly marketed it to locals and at lower prices than what we saw last year, right? F1 last year was this shiny new experience. And this year, it's like, okay, it's more of the same. We've seen it already. We know what the faults are. It's exciting. It's fun. They're still going to get a big audience, a big draw, but it's not going to be last year.
In Vegas, are they still building? Where are we in terms of that, the capacity out there in Vegas? Because it seems like every time I go back there, which might be every couple of years, I'm like, boy, that wasn't there before.
So they are very much still building. And in fact, when I was there, they blew up the Tropicana or imploded the Tropicana.
And I actually have a video. I have a video on it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, it was a fantastic light show. I actually think that they made a misstep because even though they made the light show, even though they made it this big draw of an event, and hotels were maximum capacity around it, it wasn't marketed as such. There wasn't, paraphernalia. I feel like they lost a lot of revenue that they could have sold just in terms of merchandising. Like I was there when the Tropicana imploded.
Right.
That said, you're building that huge stadium for the A's to go right
that's
there.
right. That's
so
right.
that
Okay.
stadium, and that's going to be a draw. So what they're focusing on right now, both in Macau and Vegas, is that non-gaming component.
Okay.
Right? They really want the experience side of things. They want people to come not just to gamble, also to gamble, but they want people to come and spend on experiences. They want people to go there for 2-3 days for a night's game or whatever it may be.
You mentioned Macau. How is that part of the world doing? Macau it's bigger than Las Vegas. It's obviously highly levered to mainland China. We know the Chinese economy is weaker than a lot of people would like. I'm sure the government would like. What are we seeing in Macau? What are the operators there saying?
So the operators, it's a little bit more mixed. We had that big influx. We had the dam that opened up once we finally were able to go back to Macau about a year and a half ago. I guess almost January of 2023. So from then we had this massive catalyst, and that's sort of tapered off a little bit. We're not quite back to 2019 levels. A lot of the companies are saying that they hope to get there soon. But I do sort of wonder if some of the China pullback, some of the hesitancy is flowing into Macau and to Singapore and other areas. That said, I think that the demand is there and eventually it will get back there. But I think there are some hiccups. And you have a company like Las Vegas Sands, which ironically isn't even in Las Vegas other than their headquarters. They are so heavily in Macau, but they also took off a lot of inventory for hotels and their arena, which they're redoing. So they themselves in particular have experienced somewhat of a hiccup, or a setback rather, because of the lack of inventory.
Cruise lines, where it had such an explosive demand coming out of the pandemic. One of my clearest memories at the very beginning of the pandemic is the cruise lines hit your bond market, and they raised cash because they knew how bad this could be. And it turned out to be probably, I guess, even worse given the length of the pandemic shutdown. How is the cruise business these days?
It's funny you say that, Paul, because when you talk about Hertz, now Hertz, just to bring it back to Hertz a little bit, they mentioned on their call that they plan on issuing debt to build up their cash flow. And I say, okay, the cruise lines are a little bit of a roadmap for them in terms of what other creative financing could they potentially do. Right, that's how I kind of look at it. Now, the cruise lines are a much more conservative balance sheet now than they were a few years ago. Royal Caribbean actually just got upgraded to one notch below investment grade yesterday by Moody's. That's a pretty big deal. It caused their bonds and Carnival's bonds to tighten because I think it shows that they are on the right path. Where we're sort of hesitant is if you get back to that low-income consumer, that consumer pulling back on experiences. The cruise lines have always been a year behind everyone else in the industry in terms of the return from COVID. And I think they'll also be behind about a year in terms of the pullback, and that's a function of how people book their cruises.
They book them in advance, right?
Right, they book them in advance. And the cruise lines have been spending so much energy on focusing on people spending on the non-ticket portion, so the drink packages and the experiences. And even if people do go on the cruises, they might not be so generous on those components, and that's where you might see it get affected.
So how are there certain cruise lines companies that are higher end versus lower end? Do investors think about it that way?
Yes, some of them are higher end versus lower end, at least in terms of how they target clients. So if you look at, Royal Caribbean has Celebrity, that's a higher end brand. Norwegian has a few brands that are considered like the highest brands. Viking likes to target higher end, but also non-kids.
Interesting.
Carnival, it's a little bit more of a mix because they just have everything. I mean, they have 8 different brands. So.
Right. Jody, great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. Love getting you in our studio. You've been here for a Women in Business conference tonight. Bloomberg hosting some good stuff there. Jody Lurie, credit analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. She covers all the leisure industries, the fun stuff from the credit perspective. All right, we're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.